Good evening, everyone. Let's get started, Council. I'll open up the study session for October 10th, 2017. Can I have a call to order, starting on the left?
It's order.
Order.
Roll call?
We don't do a roll call for study
Roll call.
Well, it says call to order, so I thought I
I
would
want a
do that.
pizza.
Great.
Calling us to order.
Okay. It's
What
gonna,
are we ordering?
maybe this is going to be a long evening. Okay, first off, I would actually like to recognize some of the people that we have here in the public realm. We have Dr. Tracy Pierce here from Lake Washington School District. Welcome. And we have Lisa Callan from the Issaquah School District. So welcome today. What we're going to do is we're going to start with public comment first tonight. And public comment is the opportunity for the public to address the council. 3 minutes limit per person, or 5 minutes if representing the official position of a recognized community organization. I believe that we have a video tonight. So if you wanted to show a video, that it had to be here before 5 o'clock. So I have a list here, starting with Steve Dugan. Steve, if you could give your name and address for the record, please.
Okay. My name's Steve Dugan, 5135 240th Avenue Northeast, Sammamish. I've lived in Sammamish 21 years. My kids have all attended East Lake High School, coached up here for a number of years, and we have a project next door that we are in pre-app phase. We submitted for a pre-app, which consists of a senior housing component, and it's memory care, assisted and independent living. And my personal experience, my mom I brought her up here from Southern California. She has dementia. Spiritwood down the street was the only one I could find that was close. And it was tough to find a facility that was close. And needless to say, in the neighborhood where I live and through coaching and the East Lake experience, there's the baby boomer generation were the caretakers. And to have a facility that's a quality facility adjacent to Civic Center, of course, would be ideal. And that's how it kind of evolved. And we also have a commercial project in the front, which comprises of retail, basically CVS. We've talked to medically related entities and possible affordable units on top. I know that's a big need, especially in the senior environment. When people downsizing, they want to stay in the neighborhood, but they can't afford it. So that's one of the options. And with the moratorium that was placed last week, I met with Don, and I just up here to lobby for the project to see if we can move it forward in a timely manner, because I've been working on this thing for 3 years, and I think there's a real opportunity for us to move the project forward in a timely manner, and I would appreciate any consideration in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any comments from the council? No? Okay.
Nope.
Looks like we don't have
Okay.
any comments. Thank you, Steve.
All right.
Next, I have Jim Natali.
Name is Jim Notley, Westport Commercial Real Estate, 1342 Belfield Park Lane, Bellevue, Washington, 98004. I'm part of the project over here also. I'm doing the retail component of that thing and looking at a couple of different things that we wanted to do, which is the affordable housing and or a hotel on top of that with a restaurant. We're trying to make a nice facility next door. I also was the broker for the village down the street with the Metropolitan Market. Got that in, but we started that in 2013, so you know how long it took us to get that thing through the system. So we don't want to run into the same problem again, because we all have expiration dates. So we'd like to be able to see if we can get an exemption so we can continue processing this. It's going to take us a while because we're dealing with the UZDP, which is a long process, as we know. But we want to get you the right type of product, because I know I talked to Jeff Thomas, and he says he wants the height, he wants the thing to be attractive, and that's our goal, is really to give the city back something really be proud of. It's right next door to you. So hopefully you'll give us some consideration for an exemption so we can continue to move forward. Appreciate it. Any questions?
Comments? Kathy?
Yes.
I'm trying to understand, it's a combination of residential and commercial, or is there a potential to separate the commercial from the residential?
No, they'd have to be one on top of the other.
One on top of the other?
Yeah, we have
Thank
to, we have to go up.
Yeah.
That's our goal. We want to go to the city, or to the height limit right now, but actually, we're going to see if we can try to get that extended too, because you can only go 5 stories with the current zoning that's there by the height limitation for each building, because the retail takes 20 feet right there, and the office takes 12 feet, and you start adding those up, and you run out of space real fast going up. So we're trying to get it to 75 to 80 feet, or to 85 feet even, if we possibly can get it. We want to make it very attractive. The reason for the affordable housing is that the city has a real problem getting workers in the city for the retail component. I put in the Village restaurant down the street, and I should say it was the Sammamish Village, and they had a hard time getting people to work here because they had to come from someplace else, and had a difficult time getting into the city. And that was one of the comments I heard when I was watching the video last week, and they said the comment was, is it's not so much in the city, it's coming in and out of the city where the real problem is.
Right.
And over here, we're basically, our circulation is going to be right around here. So we're not adding any more traffic, it's the existing traffic already. That answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are really ahead of schedule. Is there anybody else that would like to give public comment? Great, thank you, please. Your name and address for the record, please?
Hello, my name is Michael Mullins, 24027 Southeast 37th Place, Issaquah, Washington, or Sammamish, Washington now, 98029. I signed in over there too. First, I'd like to say to everybody, interestingly, the conversation you guys had for the moratorium on the building was the same conversation my son and I were having literally a week before that. The only thing that could really help the traffic situation and with the planning is it has to stop now, because for how long the projects take and everything else, that it's going to get so much worse before it gets better. And so I commend all of you and anybody else that was involved in the moratorium, because I think it is right for the city and right to be able to plan it out that way. I was actually here on Wednesday morning and was probably the first person to be told there's a moratorium. It wasn't online yet. It wasn't in the reporter yet. In fact, the folks at the permit office didn't even have all the answers yet. They had to get somebody from the back. I was putting in a request for a tree permit. Removal of 2 healthy trees from my property and my neighbors as well. It's just a residential house. It's something we've been working on for 3 years, building a retaining wall to shore up the slope in our backyards, and finally had negotiated all the lot lines and the placement of everything, and both our signatures on it, and at 4:40 p.m. before you guys had your meeting. So bad luck for me. But I think similar to some of these other folks here, I'm looking for an exemption of some sort. I've got one tree that is leaning at least 15 degrees towards my house from my neighbor's property. It's about a 80 to 90 foot Doug fir that frightens me. And I've had several arborists come out now to review our plan and our properties, and all of them think that should come out immediately. Now, just to expedite the process, we had filed for a healthy permit because of time and money, and unfortunately, time ran out. So,
Okay, Michael, I think we have a couple of comments here. First with Deputy Mayor Malchow.
I think I'm going to ask the same question that everybody's light that's on, which is the moratorium does not affect tree removal permits.
No, but I think it even goes further. It
Does it remove?
specifically calls it out.
Can we get that clarification?
Actually, we are coming back to you on the 17th to validate that. However, based on the code that was included in the language of the moratorium, technically it does.
Okay.
So we're coming back to you on the 17th, next Tuesday, to ask for situations like this to get clarification from the council with some suggestions from staff that we take care of things like that were basically pulled in or sucked in inadvertently. So
Michael,
stay
then
tuned.
I appreciate you bringing that to our attention.
okay, thank you. How would I know? Just by coming to the meeting next week, one way or another?
You're welcome to come, offer public comment again, or just, you could stay at home and watch it on Channel 21 or stream it through the website and just watch and see. We're planning on doing it under the city manager's report, which will be later in the evening. So,
I would just like to make a comment for the record. If it's a hazardous tree and there's some endangerment, always it's okay to take that kind of tree out if it's an imminent danger.
No, with a permit. You can't do it on your own.
with a permit.
I know more than a couple people that will call that excuse.
No, my understanding is with the tree ordinance, if it's a hazard and an endangerment, you can take it out. You have to come and get the tree permit afterwards.
I don't think it works that way.
No, I'd like clarification from the city manager before you put that on the record.
If it's a hazard, I'd like the clarification on that because
We'll
I'm sure
definitely
that we
provide
had
that
that
clarification.
conversation.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll provide that clarification.
All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you. I don't know that our permit superseded threatening, life-threatening situations.
No, that's true.
I'm pretty sure of it.
You don't have the code memorized?
Not all of it, no.
Okay, that's all of the public comment unless anyone else had changed their mind about coming out?
Okay.
That's it? Okay,
M-
well
Miss-
then,
mi-
our speaker isn't here yet. I
Right.
take it he was planning on being here
Recess?
at 7.
So he was planning on being here at 7, so my thought is, since item number 3, basically a check-in on what's going on related to transportation, was going to be very brief. We could invite Steve Liniszewski to chat for just a couple minutes.
Great.
And bring you up to date on what's going on and
We can get her after recess too.
Council, are you good with the switch?
Sure.
Great.
Sure. We don't have a speaker, so.
We have another. Go ahead, Steve.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, City Manager, staff, and citizens. Steve Liniszewski, Public Works Director. So in the packet was provided just an update since we have many items on the list this month. One is tomorrow's level of service concurrency technical meeting number 1, so our first 3-hour endeavor. So that should be an exciting meeting. We're all excited to move through the process and talk about levels of services. So that's tomorrow. Outside of that, I didn't receive any questions. If there is anything in specifics provided in the packet, I'd be more than happy to discuss that. If there's
I see.
nothing, I'd be more than happy to go back to work.
I see a couple questions, Steve.
Sure.
First, Councilmember Jaron.
Thank you. Steve, I did want to say that the flashing yellow report, the one that's working is working great.
Yeah.
And we can hardly wait for the other intersections.
A comment on that, another Councilmember Malchow asked about update. So we do use King County, I don't know if you saw the email yet, for the installations. There's 2 groups, right? The physical installation of the signal heads and then the technician who works on the cabinet. So the cabinet needs an upgrade and then the signal head gets installed. Those are 2 different groups. They are not committed to a schedule yet because they are their own priority. We are, of course, just a service that we use them for. And we have moved the 244th speed signal, the speed sign, into the higher priority. So that'll go in first, and then flashing yellow is our close second. And there is a thought too, just on next year, we have the same amount of budget. So we will probably go out for quote on installation on those and see if it's one faster, check the costs, and then that gives us the more control than the county assisting us, when they can. So that's how it's handled right now. So.
And the other question I had was on Snake Hill. How long are we going to continue to have to pump the water?
Until we're out of the ground.
Yeah.
So we are working on, we just had a meeting with City Manager's office today on a change order that'll be added to the packet to get to and through the remainder of the project. So it is a big item we're trying to finalize. So
on the 17th, we're going to come back to you, show you some pictures of what we're facing and give you a better idea of a path forward. We are running into some real constructability issues down there. We're seeing a lot of water, and Steve will have good pictures of that, et cetera. The other thing he's going to do is invite council members for individual tours or groups of 2s and 3s early next week to go down if you would like to see it.
Yes.
Wear your high boots.
I have questions from Councilmember Odell and then Councilmember Hornish.
What about me?
You're after.
That's fine. You were
Thank you,
mentioning
Steve. I
names, so-
too like the flashing yellow arrow, and I wish there was some way of hurrying it up. I did notice that the thing stops at Northeast 8th Street, though. And there are a number of intersections north of there that could benefit from it as well. So I don't know if they were included in the original analysis and fell off the table or what, but
Yeah.
given some of the traffic numbers north of Northeast 8th, I think it'd be a big help. I'm thinking Northeast 14th, Northeast 25th in particular.
So we analyzed all signals, and I don't have them all committed to memory, kind of like the city manager in the code. So I think I can certainly refresh you with a list and go from there. But I can't recall if that did or did not make the installation guidelines.
Two more things. The Inglewood Hill Drainage and Overlay, the bid opening was in September. Are we going to be able to actually make October?
Yeah. Yeah, it is lengthened. It's only going to take 2 days to pave, but then you have lifting of the utilities, right? The manholes, the water valves, the catch basins, and then striping, and then getting it all polished up. We will, once it is installed, we'll, of course, arrange a ribbon cutting and have that for the council.
Third thing is, and I'm glad we have both Lake Washington and Issaquah schools here this evening, and that is one of the major traffic issues that's surfaced in this community is actually school-related. And when we did the work with the school over on Issaquah Falls City Road, we found some ways of improving the circulation onto and off of that campus. I'm hoping that at some point in the future, we can sit down with both districts and look at each school in the city to see if there's some low-hanging fruit that can be gained there.
Yeah, and maybe the mayor can touch on the principals roundtable, but we have had meetings. Our quarterly council asked and directed, I'm pretty sure directed the city manager to start engaging the schools more consistently. So we do have quarterly meetings with admin staff as well as each school's principal. So we are working on that. I think Inglewood Junior High is another example of a collaborative effort. We've offered our services because saving trips on our roads is part of what we need to do. So if it's on school property and we can assist, we're trying to. So,
Okay, thank you, Steve.
you bet.
We've actually, as Steve was alluding to, we've actually asked input from all the principals in the city to give input.
Okay.
So from there, we have Councilmember Cornish, then Councilmember Huckabee.
One question on the flashing yellow, seems to be a hot topic. I didn't quite understand, we've got 2,250,000, 100,000 for 17, 2,250,000 for 18. Does that cover all 5, and is there more that we could do if we had, you say we're going to do as many as we can in the allotted budget?
Right.
Is there more that we would like to do if we have more budget?
We will, so with the current budget that we have, whether we change it down the road or not is up to you folks. But yes, once we know exactly what each signal is costing us, the one that they did install was smoother than we expected and quicker. So we're on T&M with King County. So as soon as we get that dialed in to a per signal transition, we'll have that number. And if we can run all of them, we'll run all of them.
And how many, there's like the 5 that you have now
I think-
scheduled, right?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't bring the total. I think it's 25 total analyzed, 17 qualify.
I was thinking 18, okay.
Yeah,
that's what I was
somewhere in there.
thinking. All right.
So if this turns out to be a 3,000 per, which I don't think it is,
We've
because
got enough, yeah.
the pieces and parts themselves are in the $15,000 range. But if we can do more, we certainly will. And I think when we have a better understanding too of how fast King County is going to work for us, and we want that to be different, and we quote it, we'll have an even better understanding, and we'll push it as far as we can.
I assume we'll hear more in the budget update at
Yeah, we didn't propose any changes, but I mean,
You just do, okay.
if we can have
carry over or whatever.
the
so.
summary and invoicing done from King County for that work, we can tell you the per, and if that seems to be something we're interested in, it's,
Got it.
yeah.
All right, more to come.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Huckabee and then Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Thank you. Yes, I had sent an email on to the city manager today, asking whether you had had the opportunity to try and really look at the source of the water that is flowing on Snake Hill. I know you haven't had time, but...
We responded today to your email.
Pardon?
I responded today.
Oh, I'm sorry, I hadn't
That's
seen
okay.
that. So, having lived there for 31 years, we knew that the water was flowing straight south and then cutting over. And so part of my question was, do we have issues with the stormwater retention from above that needs to be addressed, or is this going to be an issue even after this road is constructed and causes problems in the future?
So, and the water's natural drainage course, underground, subterranean,
Yeah.
was moving through there. We do not believe it is any sort of failure of systems upstream. And why we believe that is we had 50-plus days of no rain, and we still
And
had
you
water
still had water,
intrusion.
sure.
Right? It just became evident when we made the large cut for the vault itself that it was higher than expected. We had tests on the water, or the soils, that showed water down 20 feet, which we could have managed more simply, but it's coming in at a higher level in that soil matrix, and it's moving the soil, so we can't get a stable slope to excavate and work under. So, but yes, it was a great question. We looked into our water mains leaking. You know, not all pipes are perfect.
Right.
Water systems, if you know it or not, are allowed to have what's called distribution system leakage. The standard is between 5 and 10%. I am not quite sure what.
Also know that that neighborhood, which is where I used to live, that neighborhood, all of the water lines from the main to the homes are substandard.
Sure.
And are very much subject to leaking, and they have leaked over time. So, what's going on, we don't know, and
Right.
until we can get the water district to provide us some of that information, we won't know. Then I wanted to turn to the moratorium and the traffic. My one concern is that I've been seeing a lot of chatter about too little, too late. And I would like to understand what we can do in the short term. I think we've all talked about short-term fixes. Schools particularly are the one major issue in how we can manage to work with all of the schools to see what we can do to either have access off of 228th. And I'm wondering if you're also working with Eastside Catholic through that process. And what about the school at Mary Queen of Peace?
So Eastside Catholic is part of the quarterly admin and city meetings we have.
Are
So
we
they're always
bringing
invited.
somebody in from Mary Queen of Peace?
No.
Because they have a very large, it's a homeschool program, and when I was invited to come and talk about city government, I was amazed at the number of classes they have and the number of people they have, and I've noticed that there's a lot of traffic flowing in and out of there, as well as kids crossing the street in the morning, so I'd suggest maybe we bring them into the process as well. But in addition to the flashing yellow, and I have to say again, it means that I can go home tonight and I don't have to sit there wondering if I can run the red light without anybody seeing me. So I'm very pleased. But what about some of the other things that we haven't had time to address? Really, the safe walkability projects that we had been talking about for a long time. Looking at each intersection and seeing the sight distances, and I know that people are tired of hearing me say this, but when you turn left at QFC, you can see that there are cars that are backing up into the left traffic lane because the bushes are too wide. It's not a height issue, it's a width issue. And every time I drove by there today, which was 4 times, the lead car is never pulling up as far as they should because that cuts off their sight distance. And I'm sure that's happening at a lot of other intersections around the community. So I really would hope that we could take and look at some of those simple things. The other...
I did ask maintenance to look into that one.
Yeah, that would be
from
great
a
if
week or so
maintenance
ago.
could look into some of those things. But I'm wondering what under what code or under what decision-making are we allowing construction equipment to be parked in the lanes of our major roads? For example, in front of Ichijo, there was a construction equipment that had a cone around it in the right lane, and it was there for 2 days. I didn't see any activity around it.
It's every day.
Well, it's every day on almost all the other roads, because I live on Southeast 4th and we see it all the time. But to tie up our major arterial with construction equipment, and then nobody's around the vehicle, and it's just sitting there. We know we have trouble getting 2 lanes of traffic through, but when these construction equipment pieces are blocking one of the lanes, I'm hoping that we can take a look at that and have somebody monitoring that, because I don't know if they're getting permission to do those things, or if that is that they're just taking the assumption that they can go ahead and do that.
They normally have permission to do work on 228th. Whether they stage their vehicles there or not is not allowed. Now, if they have to move a piece of equipment out that they can't physically get the truck and trailer into the site, they do make accommodations through us to get that in and out of there, but that is a 15 to 30-minute exercise, not all day.
This Ichijo had it for 2 days.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can,
On 228th in the right lane.
Yeah,
Our
no,
inspectors-
that should not have happened. We'll double check with the police officers as well and make sure that they're aware of that. Normally, if they would need to do that for a long period of time, they would have to apply for a permit to do that, because that's generally not allowed.
Thank you.
Great. Deputy Mayor Malchow?
I have a super simple question here. The 212th non-motorized project?
yes.
It's right down by what I think is the sewer main, right at the corner of 24th. There's like 4 or 5 black poles sticking up. I'm assuming there'll be fencing putting in there, because it references plantings, but not any fencing. Is that what? They're black poles sticking up out of the concrete. It looks like there's supposed to be a fence there. There is no fence there currently. Is that still part of the work to be done? Like if a kid were to stand on there, they would could fall
If there's
over.
I don't know the plans off the top of my head, but if we have sleeved it, it is normally for fence installation.
Okay,
So if there's some black poles sticking out of the backside, we're probably just waiting on the fencing company.
okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. I think Councilmember Hornish is looking for a question, or excuse me, Odell, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to pile on with Kathy on the parking on the arterials. I've seen this repeatedly, particularly on 228th, but elsewhere. And I would like to ask the city manager to have both code enforcement and the police department keep an eye on this, because it does create a flow issue and worse, a weaving issue, which is a safety problem. Thank you.
Great. Thank you,
One-
Councilmember Odell.
Yeah, one comment on that. I do know there is a permit, and it's hard to tell if the car is there and no one's around it, but on the southbound west side, there are some box vans that have been out there that are permitted. They're pulling fiber conduit. So they sit there, and then they're off to the side. Sometimes you can't tell if they are or aren't even there. So I have personally chased them off the road at 4:45 on a Friday, because they were pulling cable, and then, the cables get bound up, and they're screaming in the, inside their vault themselves, and they want to be gone, but sometimes it happens. But those are instances where I know there are vehicles parked that may not look like they're doing anything, but 10 feet over behind the sidewalk, there's a vault that they're in. So it looks vacant, but
I mentioned
yeah.
a very large piece of construction
Sure.
equipment.
Thank you.
Okay. We have no more questions, but I did notice that we had some people come in since, and I'm wondering are you here for public comment? Pardon? I don't think he's here. Right, so if some individuals came for public comment, Steve, I think we might indulge the individuals that are here. If you'd like to come up and give some public comment. Steve?
I think I'm out.
Yep, we're loaded.
Thank you.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes, and your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Diana Merritt. My address is 3450 East Lake Sammamish Parkway Northeast. I'm actually currently not living at that residence. I had actually applied or had an appointment on Tuesday when the emergency moratorium was announced. So I'm here just to let you know that I'm an individual and it will impact me. I know that you're talking about a 6-month moratorium, but that really concerns me as to whether actually even 6 months will be very impactful for me. I was counting on my subdivision to actually be able to move back to my home. So I don't know how you came up with a cutoff as to who's included in the moratorium. I listened to the meeting last week and wasn't quite sure. It seemed like it was a pretty broad, since my meeting on Tuesday was canceled, I assume that I'm included in the moratorium. So if there's a process for any kind of, it's definitely a hardship. So if there's a process or input that the council would like to hear about individuals and individual hardship, I would appreciate being included.
Great. I think Councilmember Jaron would like to make a comment or ask a
Yeah,
question.
just a question. You said your meeting on Tuesday was canceled, but we didn't know we were passing moratorium until Tuesday night.
I'm sorry, it was on Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I actually had been through the, I had preliminary short plat approval back in the mid-2000s and decided that it was an optimal time for me to do the short plat. And due to hardship, this was. And we've been working on the process for quite some time now. So we're pretty far into the commitment with my contractor that was doing the work. He's called the city many times, never been alerted to any potential of a moratorium. So it came as quite a shock and disappointment.
Well, if I could just comment, I think the city manager had indicated that any exceptions that we would be looking at, I don't mean individuals, but any changes or any additions to the moratorium would be discussed in his council report. When is that?
We're next Tuesday, under the city manager's report, we'll take all the comments that we've heard from the citizens and others and come back to the council and try to organize what those are and ask for direction from council or clarification from them.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
very
you.
much. Anyone else that would like to give public comment, please?
Hello, my name is Brian Levitt. I live at 414 218th Avenue Southeast, and I too am an individual who we're a few days away from submitting our final short plat application. My wife and I have lived here, for over 20 years, raised our kids here. We're looking to do a short plat, but not leaving the area. We're not developers who are going to clear cut and run. We have 2 parcels. We hope to live the rest of our lives on the adjoining parcel. And this impacts us big time. Our plan, we realized a long time ago, Sammamish is a pretty expensive place to live. And so we'd like to do a short plat so we can help our kids live here. And, at this point, we're into this for tens of thousands of dollars, and it's going to hurt us. So I just ask you to take into account the balance between the rights of property owners and the traffic that we're all experiencing. But as a property owner, this hurts. This hurts me and my family. So just ask you to take that into consideration.
Thank you very much. Okay. I see no more questions from the council. And is there any other public comment? I think our speaker is here. Mary? I think we'll call this a close to our public comment then.
I'm Mary Wichter. I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. I just have a concern with the moratorium. In the past, it's never included single-family lots in Inglewood or Tamarack, so in the 7 years that the city had the moratorium before, we never had any lack of building during that time. I believe this moratorium also does not put a moratorium in any houses in Inglewood or Tamarack. I'm particularly concerned about Tamarack west flowing. We know that there are drainage problems there, and there are multiple vacant lots above, and if you allow that to happen, you've got a moratorium. People aren't going to be able to build in town center. They're going to start building wherever they can build. They'll take vacant lots that are single-family homes that are already platted. You're actually forcing more development in our area when we know we have known drainage problems. So I would ask that you consider that, particularly for areas that you know have drainage problems, like west flowing Tamarack, that you would have restrictions on that. You also have some landslide hazard code that's going to be coming toward you. It's at the Planning Commission now. So I would like to have you consider that, because it just doesn't make any sense, maybe in the whole Zaccoose Basin, that you're going to be looking in that. It just doesn't make sense to throw a lot of development there, particularly on steep slopes, and you're looking at lessening some of those requirements for drainage as well. So I'm super concerned about that, and I didn't plan to speak tonight, but since other people are giving input, I wanted to get that in before next Tuesday's meeting.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, with that, public comment is closed, and I believe our speaker is here this evening, so Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to welcome John Williams, our King County Assessor. Welcome. Wilson, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm so sorry, John. I'm sorry. John Wilson, our King County Assessor. And John was kind enough to offer to come chat with the council and share with us some of the issues that we're facing going forward with the property taxes, both regionally in King County as well as locally here in Sammamish. Particularly as it affects some of the McCleary legislation that came into play, and then also what we could expect from ST3 in property taxes. So that, and I'm sure a few other tidbits that you're going to throw in. So John, welcome.
Good enough. Mr. Mayor, and all of you, thank you very much for having me out here tonight. I want to give you a kind of quick overview of what we as a region are facing here. You know, what we see is a tale of three cities. Let's see if I can get this to work. Here we go. And those cities are San Francisco, Vancouver, and Seattle. And they all carry some very similar traits. They're Pacific gateways, thriving metropolitan areas, diverse populations with robust economies. But they're all facing certain challenges ahead. Uncertain times of trade with Asia and investment from Asia, concentration of wealth that's creating a growing economic disparity. Each region is facing a serious impact from the shortage of affordable housing, whether it's to rent or purchase, and cuts in environmental stewardship that threaten the very quality of life that I know so many of you here value. It also is focused a lot, and we'll focus tonight on the housing challenge, first and foremost. The fact is regionally, our supply is wildly out of sync with our demand. And demand has steadily, and in some cases rapidly, been driving up the cost of housing. I live in the Seattle area of Roosevelt, just across from Roosevelt High School. My neighbor's house went on the market in April of 2016 for $760,000. Not an enormous amount, not an odd amount for that neighborhood. It sold within 3 days for $900,000. I was talking a couple days afterwards to an assessor from another county, from Kittitas County, and she was saying, well, the average home in my county is $140,000. I said, well, I have homes in my county that go up that much in value in 72 hours. We live in an amazingly dynamic real estate market now, and there's some good things about that in terms of building your equity. There's some risks, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of those, because part of it is the income required to afford that kind of housing. If you look, let's see here, you see the median price of a home in San Francisco is $1.5 million. In Vancouver, BC, that number is $838,000. And here in Puget Sound in Seattle, but Sammamish is about in the same ballpark, about $722,000. If you look with the Seattle median home price of $722,000, it's up about 11% over the last 12 months. It'll go up probably another double-digit amount over the next 12. It requires a household income of $140,000 a year. Average rent in the region right now is almost $2,200 a month. I care about affordability in part, I must confess, for a very personal reason. My wife and I raised 4 kids. We still have 2 that live in the area, and the youngest one is a wonderful chef, but she doesn't make $140,000 a year, and instead what it is, Dad, can I borrow a few bucks this month? Because I'm a little short on rent. And I'd like her to be long on rent and short in getting into my pocketbook. but it's a challenge. You know, if you look, the average teacher salary is $63,000. If you look over the trends, though, let's look at what we're looking at as a whole at the county. You can see we're facing unprecedented growth. These are 2016 figures, but you can see employment growth is up, housing prices significantly up, sales tax up, and the final one, inflation, is down. At the same time, the growth forecasts show that, you know, employment's going to continue up, inflation's continuing low, housing prices are continuing to go up, and personal income is going up, but not at the same pace that housing prices are. Now, if you look overall across the county, we got out of the recession of 2009 and hit the bottom kind of in 12, and our total assessed value last year or this year was over $450 billion. I come tonight with news that we have topped the $500 billion mark for the first time in the history of the county. Total assessed value in the county is now $511 billion. That's a new record. Now, that's good news in that that assessed value means there's more to be spread around to cover the cost of basic services and that. But there are going to be some challenges we face. If you look over the last 5 years, property taxes are up roughly 30%, up 8% in the last year. Roughly half of your property tax goes to schools, public education, whether through the state share or local share, and then there's also a significant amount that you, the voters, we vote on. But what you see is that the lack of state funding has forced more and more school districts to ask for property taxes for both operation and construction. This is part of what McCleary was designed to address. We have some districts in the county that have passed significant bond issues. The 1% property tax cap is actually causing counties to face dealing with providing increasing services, but with a structural deficit built in, so that the gap grows wider and wider. And then with the passage of Sound Transit 3 last year, we now have a Sound Transit being funded by both a sales tax increase, an MVED increase, and a property tax for the first time. In addition, we have some neighborhoods, perhaps particularly we find in South King County, that had both been hit hardest by the recession, but were the more affordable parts of the county, that are coming back this year at a 25% increase year to date. Now, what the legislature did, and I think hopefully we're all familiar, that basically what it said is the state's constitutional mandate, a paramount duty to fund public education, means that the courts ruled the legislature has to fund basic education from state funds, not from local funds. What the legislature decided to do this last session is what they call a levy swap, and it would basically increase the state property tax share, and eventually voter levies would go out. So for this next year, when you get your tax bill in February of 2018, and it comes on Valentine's Day. Now, I don't know what kind of sick individual decided that that would be a jolly thing to do, but it is a sort of twisted way to say we love you, and by the way, pay up. But you will see a significant increase in your property taxes. It is going to be a double-digit increase. Perhaps somewhere north of 20%. We'll go specifically and look at Sammamish here in just a minute and a couple other East Side communities. What it means, though, is that in 2019, levies will start to be capped at either $1.50 per thousand of assessed value or $2,500 per student, whichever is less. Now, this is the first time in how we have funded public education where potentially, probably not here in Sammamish, but potentially elsewhere in the state, assessed value is going to directly relate to what the funding is for public education. I was over in Bellevue last night. They were talking about their situation, or because of their high assessed value, similar to what you have here, they actually will use the $2,500 per student charge, and they think they'll come out a bit of a wash in terms of education funding. But Everett, that has roughly the same student population, will go with the $1,500 or $1.50 per thousand property tax, and will actually end up losing money. We're going to see some of that within King County, where some areas with lower assessed value will find that they may well be in a deficit. It also is going to mean that your 2019 property taxes will be higher than they are today, but hopefully come down some from the 2018 level. Now, let's show you what you're really all here to see. What's it going to do to Sammamish? Well, if you look, and let me put the caveat on the table, we are still crunching numbers. This is an estimate. This is not something, please, to budget against. But part of our frustration, frankly, has been between the legislature, the Office of Public Instruction, the Department of Revenue, and ourselves. We have 4 different numbers floating around as to what this is supposed to be. So we're trying to finally get some kind of resolve of, okay, what does it look like? But in general, what you see is in 2017, the median value of a home here was $650,000. It's gone up to $728,000. That's about 11, and your millage rate has gone up a bit from $10.64 to $11.52. The bottom line, though, is what it's going to mean for you is roughly on that average home, that $728,000 home, a $1,400 property tax increase in 2018, or roughly 22%. Now, what I want to make sure you understand is we've also got sound transit in there, and that's going to be 25 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. So you can figure that if the assessed value has gone up 12%, the amount of money that sound transit is going to pull out of the community will be roughly 12% higher too, because it's tied. They went for a millage rate tied directly to assessed value.
John, let me just make sure, is sound transit included in this or not?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
When you look, here's the breakout of what we've got. In red shows you the difference of what's happening with the state share of funding education. And so in 2017, it's $2.03. It goes up to $2.85, a rate change of about 81 cents, almost 82 cents. Now, what you'll see here in green are other county-wide levies or county-wide property taxes, such as for APHIS, the fingerprinting system, parks and open space, county lid lifts that have been voted on. You also see in red here, we have for human services, that's the human service and vets levy that is on the ballot in November. If it passes at its current rate of 0.3 of a cent, it would increase the property tax by 0.06 and that. You can see then you have Best Starts for Kids and other things. You have county bonds, the county flood zone, the county ferry district, port, EMS, and here's the Regional Transportation Authority, Sound Transit, see how it figures in. And then you're served by the Issaquah School District largely. You can see here you have a number of levy issues here that have been voted on for M&O, bonds, and capital. Now, I was recently talking to the superintendent of the Issaquah schools, and he said he's uncertain, frankly, himself, what the impact is going to be on the school district. But he's fearful that it could be as much as $15 million in lost revenue. We'll have a better idea of that as we move forward. But as you can see, what it means overall is there's a rate change such that it's going to be higher property taxes. Now, the good news is you're getting off cheap compared to your neighbors. I know it doesn't look like cheap, but let's take a look here. This is for Bellevue, and the numbers are a little smaller because, go ahead.
First of all, we're served by 3 different school districts.
Right.
So will we be able to take this information that you have and then and create what will happen in the Lake Washington School District and the other districts?
We will develop that for each one of the school districts.
Very good.
Part of what we're having to do this time that we have not had to do so much in the past is we're having to get from each school district input on also whether they're going to the $2,500 per student or the $1.50 per thousand. But we will have that for you. And we recognize communities like Sammamish that are served by multiple school districts and that. You're going to have situations here where because of how the school district boundaries fall, somebody on one side of the street is going to be paying X and somebody on the other side of the street is going to be paying Y. But be thankful you don't live in Bellevue, because if you look there, Their average tax change is a total of $2,000. And as one Bellevue council member said to me last night, I can't find a $790,000 home in Bellevue. And if you look at the percentage is 36%. But wait, there's more. This is Mercer Island. Somewhat a similar story. Their AV has gone up from a little over $1 million to a little over $1.2 million. Their average tax increase is more than $2,000 on average. Their total tax increase is a little over 22, almost 23%. Then let's see, do we have Kirkland? Kirkland, AV also went up. Their tax increase is going to be about $1,054 or 21%. The pattern we are seeing throughout King County is that there is going to be an increase somewhere probably between 20 and 36%, maybe even a little higher, in property taxes for the 2018 year that you pay your property taxes in.
John?
Sure.
John, could I interrupt you just for 1 second? Going back to Sammamish's numbers.
Right.
One of the things this council has prided themselves on is the fact that they have not raised property taxes in 8 years. They've only taken new construction. So, and coming back to give you a preview, we're anticipating not asking again for the additional 1%, and so we'll hold it static. So the number there that you see where the property tax stays the same at $1.92, we would anticipate, because of the increase in assessed value within Sammamish, that people's property tax rate for the city of Sammamish's taxes to actually go down, which will help counteract what they're seeing from other jurisdictions. So I just wanted to point that out.
And I think that in part explains why, while your assessed value is relatively similar to Bellevue's, why your millage rate is going down. As some of you may well understand, Washington State has a slightly complicated and convoluted property tax system. That may be an understatement.
John, I refer to it as being backwards compared to what most cities or most states do.
Yes, and we're going to see about that. But what it, if you will, functions a bit like a scale in that communities like Sammamish, school districts and that, send us what they believe their budgetary requirement is, and then we balance that against millage rate and assessed value to come out with how much are we going to raise your property or how much are we going to charge you in property taxes. The thing that is changing here, though, is that for the first time what the state is doing is basically saying taxpayers in King County in particular are going to pay a higher percentage of property tax in order to fund basic state education, and those state dollars will be then dispersed across the state. Now, they'll also come back here to your community. But what we are going to find is that basically what we are doing, and it's understandable given the tremendous wealth in this county, we are being asked to shoulder the cost of funding public education elsewhere around the state. And because that we're seeing these rising taxes, you're going to see also some problems that are coming. Low-income seniors are not exempt from special levies, as the law now is. Executive Constantine and I are actually working with the legislature to hopefully in the next session exempt seniors from that. Just quickly, a quick pitch for the senior exemption. If any of you are 61 and older, an owner-occupant, and have an annual household income of $40,000 a year or less, call 206-296-3920 and apply for your property exemption now. If not, good luck. But the fact is, we're trying to encourage people to file for that.
I'm sorry. John, I'm sorry. Councilmember Jaron had a question.
Sure.
Yes, to follow up on our city manager's question. On your table, you show the same levy rate for 2017 as 2018 for all those along there, like the library at 45 cents. But you're using higher values for the properties?
Again, this is in still a draft form, council members, so these numbers will change some as we finalize them. But if you will, we're having to we normally calculate nearly 600 separate levy codes this year. We're having to go back and redo them all, even more than we normally do as far as just an adjustment, to make sure that this all checks. And because this is the second year that we've had Sound Transit in the property tax mix, we're having to go back and double check our math there to make sure everything trues up. So I just caution you, don't take the numbers I showed you as gospel and start budgeting against them. We will have numbers for you as soon as we can get them. But again, part of our frustration this year has been the legislature took this action and never bothered to talk to apparently either the Department of Revenue or any of the major county assessors to try to get some idea of what the impact would be or what set of numbers should they use. And so we've been spending a lot of time wrestling with how did you get to that number? Why did you get to that number? What did you use as assessed value and all of that?
But I mean, in that table, if we assume that property values went up 11% in the last year, then the levy rate should go down 11% to keep us collecting the same amount of taxes.
Indeed, it's done on that levelized basis that is for a dollar amount. It depends on whether, and I'll admit I can't remember specifically, but you know, you'll have some, for example, like the Sound Transit levy that is attached to a specific, you know, millage rate per 1,000. If it's not, yes, you're right. It will. If assessed values go up, the millage rate will actually come down slightly. Mm-hmm. It may not mean, though, that you necessarily end up paying less in total dollars. So you have to be careful there that the assessed value going up 11% won't necessarily mean that the millage rate's going to drop by 11%. So,
John, I have a couple other questions,
sure.
If you don't mind. Councilmember Huckabee and then Councilmember Valderrama.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you about the low-income seniors. I understand that is a deferral as opposed to a forgiveness?
There are two programs, actually,
okay.
ma'am.
Thank you.
There is an exemption program, which is the economic threshold is set at $40,000. And that is simply a straight-up exemption to certain property taxes or a share of the property taxes. Then at $45,000 as the economic threshold, there is a deferral. And in that case, what happens is a lien is placed on your property, and at the time of sale of your property, then what you would have paid otherwise is trued up, and the state takes its share first from sales of the property. We generally, frankly, encourage people to apply for the exemption rather than the deferral, but in some cases, people's economic situation or their income is such that they can't get down to the $40,000 level, and they can get to the 45, so we try to help them with that. Does that?
Thank you very much. I appreciate
Yes.
that.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yes, I was going to see if we could go back to the table of Councilmember Lambert and see, you had mentioned that ST3 is included, but I couldn't see what percentage of that 1,400 was ST3 versus McCleary.
The increase that you're getting is all McCleary.
I understand that, but what was the percentage on your breakout when you had it? So if we could go back to that slide,
Yeah.
to the 1,400. Yeah, that's it. And so where is the ST3 breakout on this?
ST3 shows up in here, where you can see the CPS Regional Transit Authority.
Okay.
It remains a constant, so it will go up dependent upon the assessed value. But that is not part of the $1,400 number here is purely McCleary driven.
So that's only McCleary, it does not include the ST3 piece.
Right. That's why I caution you that there may be, it may be lower, it may be higher, dependent upon other things as we start to calculate those out.
We now have Deputy Mayor Malchow.
You may be getting to this a little bit later in your presentation, but last night in Bellevue, they stated that they're going to pay an additional $44 million, but only 20 will stay there. The rest of it will be distributed
Right.
through the state. Do you have information for Sammamish on that end?
We do not just yet.
Okay.
Part of that is we need to work with the school districts to get that. We know from talking to Issaquah that they've been working on it. We're getting together here later this month with all the superintendents from throughout King County to try to compare notes and see if we can all get on the same page as what the impacts are going to be.
Great. Thank you.
I have a quick question. I saw that you had Kirkland and Lake Washington School District was broken out there. You hadn't broken out Lake Washington School District for Sammamish yet, but are the numbers that are reflected in Kirkland the same as what they may be in Sammamish for Lake Washington School District? Just those line items?
Hesitant to tell you yes. I mean, they should be as a rough rule, but again, what I'd ask is you know, we put these together quickly. We expect to have more final numbers here in the next couple weeks. So it gives you some ballpark on that. What we're trying to do now is frankly get out and talk to people and not have you surprised in February. We also want to start a discussion about, frankly, the kind of increase we're placing or the kind of weight we're placing on the property tax raises serious questions about the sustainability of that property tax. And whether certainly in King County here, can you afford to continue taxing property at the kind of levels that you are and not trigger either, frankly, a backlash or have significant adverse impacts on homeowners and others. You know, what we are now seeing is cases, and kind of looping around to the senior exemption, where people who earn more than that $40,000, but they bought that home perhaps in the 70s or so, and maybe they paid at the time $75,000 or maybe $100,000, but now that home's worth $3.5 million, and suddenly they have a property tax bill that was never within their financial planning, unless they had just an incredible crystal ball, that they could see that that's the kind of property tax that we're going to be looking at. And it speaks to the greater question we think that needs to be addressed over the next couple years, is we need to modernize both service delivery and how we raise revenue, because we have a disconnect. Our system is both regressive and it's overly reliant upon the property tax. We saw what happened in California when that happened, is you got Proposition 13, which ended up playing havoc with all kinds of facets of local government and frankly moved local control from the communities largely to Sacramento. We are seeing some of that happen now with this McCleary solution, because part of what it will do in the future is tie school districts' hands a bit on what can you go and get levy money for, and what is your definition of basic education versus the state's definition. Now, the arguments made by proponents of McCleary, that's the whole point, was to have one definition of public education, of basic education across the state. But the challenge is when you have communities like Sammamish and a number of them here in King County who have willing parents, willing voters who are willing to put more money on the table for public education, the state's basically saying to them, no, you'll have to settle for the lowest common denominator. And this is what we're willing to fund, and we're not willing to let you fund anything else. I think that's bad policy. I think it's particularly destructive. I understand the equity issue across the state, but one of my frustrations as an assessor is I see other counties around the state that aren't assessing property anywhere close to market value. Now, we intentionally run below market value and we run a lag because we're setting values set effective January 1 of each year. So what you could sell your home for tomorrow is probably going to be less than what our value reflects in January 1. But I've got other jurisdictions that are setting those values, those assessed values, at 80% or less of market value. And that means disproportionately, while there is equalization of state funding, it means we're being asked to pick up, I think, more than our fair share of funding statewide education because some of those communities won't. And that's wrong. But it means we've got to start to look anew at how we deliver services. For example, statewide, the state has roughly 24 contracts for aerial imaging. I don't know how many of you might have saw the just devastating visuals out of California yesterday of Santa Rosa, where residential neighborhoods like you would have here were just leveled by fire, all within a period of 24 hours. We could face that here. Not maybe here, right here, but for example, the county assessor in Okanagan County says, when we had the huge forest fires there several years ago, he said, I've got thousands, if not millions of acres of destroyed timber, but I can't tell how extensive it is because I literally can't get to those areas anymore because culverts have washed out, bridges are gone, roads are gone, and I need better aerial imaging. We've suggested to the state, why don't you create sort of an a la carte menu of aerial services that we could all opt into and save the taxpayer money and deliver better services. At the same time, when we look at revenues here, one of the challenges we have is those are out of sync with reality. For example, we fund 911 through a combination of a tax on your mobile phone and on your landline. Landlines are continuing to disappear. I have one of my friends was over at the house a few months ago and said, how quaint that you still have a landline. Of my 4 kids, I think only one of them actually knows what a landline is. But the fact is, those aren't coming back. But that 911 service is literally life and death. And I speak from a very personal perspective on that. My brother-in-law 3 years ago was living in Kirkland. He was walking to the bank one Saturday afternoon, and he fell suddenly of a massive heart attack. He was clinically dead. Thank God for a passing bicyclist who started CPR, got somebody to call Kirkland 911, and they arrived and they hit him with the paddle 7 times, and they literally brought him back to life. He's alive today because we have that kind of world-class emergency service. But that's in jeopardy when we don't fund it to match the realities of how government and how the world works. We see it with the gas tax. The fact is that more and more of us are going to either more fuel-efficient cars, non-fossil fuel-burning cars, public transportation, a variety of things. And so the gas tax is either levelizing or falling in many cases. At the same time, our number of road miles are increasing. We somehow need to start to get honest with ourselves and honest with you, the taxpayers of the community, of what does it take to run government? And we may have to ask some tough questions about how much government can we afford. But just thinking that the property tax is a giant ATM machine is not sustainable. And I shudder to think what would happen if something like Proposition 13 was brought to this state and the devastating consequences it would be to communities like this and all the other ones that serve King County. On that happy note,
I have a question from Councilmember Huckabee and then Councilmember Valderrama.
I have a question and a comment. Like many others who are parents of disabled children, many of us were drawn to this community because the school districts of Issaquah and Lake Washington really have excellent programs for children with special needs. Is there any carve-out for that? Because many districts do not provide those services at all, but yet the districts that are providing that service, it's a higher cost, obviously. And so how does that get into the equity mix, or doesn't it?
I will ask you to go into greater detail with your own school district people, but for example, that was one of the things we touched on last night in Bellevue, that the Bellevue school officials said similar. They said, you know, we pride ourselves that we provide for the disabled and special learning situations. The state provides some money, but frankly, a fraction of what is truly needed to provide that kind of service. It's again, one of the problems with the legislation from my perspective is you tell us you're funding basic education, but you've taken a fairly narrow view of what that basic education is, and you've left some people out. And if we're truly trying to educate all, I don't see how you do that. So, there's a lot of talk already among legislators. I've spoken to some this fall about going in the 2018 session and trying to tweak this. I think they recognize they adopted something a little bit on the run and on the gun, and they're now starting to see some serious problems with it, and hopefully they'll fix it. But I would hope they'd be mindful of both what they're actually going to fund and deliver, as well as who are they getting to pay for that.
My comment was that we have many family and friends in Texas, and Texas has no business taxes, basically.
Right.
It's all on the property tax. And a comparable home in Texas has a much lower value than ours would here because the property taxes are so much higher. My concern is that we may be in a bubble, and if we keep moving up these property taxes, it's going to be much more difficult, and actually people will begin to pay less because they're going to have to pay so much more on the property tax when they're buying those homes.
I think that's a legitimate concern. You're right that in Texas, values in Texas are astonishingly low, especially compared to our region, but their property taxes are much higher. There was somebody in our shop a couple years ago who happened to own a family home in Texas, and she said its assessed value was about $375,000. Not a huge size home. But she said her property taxes were $15,000 a year. So, I think this raises the question of, like, as we look at how we modernize the system and how we try to make sure we're not taxing people out of their homes, one of the things we may need to finally consider is do we look at something like a homestead exemption, which would provide some relief to all taxpayers or means tested to some threshold, so that we aren't in that situation where people find, I just can't afford to live here anymore. Because I think that's where we're headed if we don't start to get smart about this.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Before we leave this happy note, as you had mentioned before, I do agree we need the homestead type of acts here, because already I've been hearing people talking about a Proposition 13 that because of the anger that's being felt from each of these. There was an article, well, let me preface it. You had mentioned earlier that we here in King County are paying an unfair proportion because of how it's assessed. There was an article posted by Representative Manuel out in Ellensburg, where he said that this was actually the article, and his position was that this was a purposeful mugging by the rest of the state, and that our representatives have across King County, including Seattle, had let us down in that regard to let this happen across party lines that had gone. I don't know if you share that opinion, given your comment of the unfair proportion being born here.
I'm not sure if it was quite the mugging, but I do think that the dynamics of this played out in such a way that I think there was a notion of, well, King County can afford this. And I think we have to be sensitive and careful right now that there's a bit of a dichotomy or an optic that is deceptive. I don't mean corrupt deceptive, but as you drive around this community, or you drive around many of the other communities in King County, there are all the signs of a booming economy. Cranes everywhere. Seattle, for most of last year, that had more cranes, not per capita, more construction cranes than any other city in North America, including New York, Toronto, Chicago, and that. And so on the one hand, it looks very much, I think, to kind of the general public and to so many of us, like, these are the best of times and there's no worry. We should all sing Bobby McFerrin. I will not bless you with my singing. I cannot do that to the public at this time. But the fact is underlying it are some significant drawdowns. Part of it is the disproportionate reliance on the property tax that is affecting very many middle-class homeowners, younger homeowners, and older homeowners. In addition, what we are starting to see somewhat, and it's something that you've seen already in San Francisco and you've seen in Vancouver, is as property taxes and property values reach a certain threshold, they begin to become a brake on economic prosperity. That companies start to look and go, you know what, I can't afford to pay my people enough to live here anymore, so we're going to have to take our expansion and we're going to move it to Omaha. We're going to move it to Texas. We're going to put it someplace where property is much less expensive and where if I'm paying that person $90,000 a year, it's spending like up here $290,000. And there's a price we will pay for that. And we need to be honest with ourselves that's part of what's also going on here is companies on a daily basis. And you can sense that to some extent that's part of what Amazon is considering, not totally. But they're looking at what's the cost of doing business here. And an important component part of that is what's the cost of providing housing for my workforce. And that raises questions. So we've somehow, if we want to truly have long-term economic viability, long-term and sustainable economic growth, and quality of life, we're going to have to step back and redesign both how government works and how we fund that government.
I see a question from Councilmember O'Dowd.
Have you ever given any consideration indexing the senior
Yeah.
thing?
And in fact, there is legislation that will be introduced this upcoming session that would index the senior exemption economic threshold and tie it to either the CPI or average median income in each county. Because one of the problems with it is it's the same $40,000 threshold across the state. In smaller rural counties, that $40,000 runs the risk of taking a significant portion of their tax base off the tax base. Whereas in King County, the problem we have is $40,000 might not be enough. So we'd like to look at that. We also believe if that isn't successful, another thing to look at is the possibility. We believe under state law, we've been having the prosecutor's office look at this for us. We believe that under current state law, we could offer a homestead exemption for seniors, the disabled, and disabled vets. That might be an alternative way to get to the same result of trying to provide some relief to those taxpayers.
Well, I happen to be one of the people who might otherwise qualify for it, except I can't hit the threshold. But I've been on fixed income for the last 10 years, and I'm getting closer to the squeezing point, as I'm sure are some of my compatriots up here. It's a real problem because, frankly, while people may have bought in, to use your example, for 75 to 100K way back when, and when I bought my house here, it was 300K, which is twice as much as what I sold for back in Minnesota to move here. It went down for 3 years and is now basically a multiple of that number. But frankly, $2,000 on top of what I'm already paying out is going to become more and more of an issue because my pension, other than Social Security, is not indexed.
No, and it's not increasing at anywhere near the same rate.
Right.
And that. No, and it's again what is troublesome about our over-reliance on the property tax, and that ironically, we tax seniors who qualify for the exemption program. When Seattle ran an affordable housing levy last year, I mentioned to the then mayor of Seattle that there was a sort of policy disconnect, that you were putting an affordable housing levy on the ballot for Seattle voters, but then you were going to turn around and tax the very people that were qualified for the program. And it seemed a little bit of reverse Robin Hood-ish, if you will. And I got a shrug and yeah, well, but they can afford it. They got lots of equity.
Well,
Yeah, you can
equity is
really
not
go to the
cash.
ATM with
No, it isn't. And, you know, it's again, to me, I would certainly hope that we are a community that believes we should not be taxing one another out of their homes. But we are perilously close to that. I hear too many stories each week as I travel about the county of good, if you will, bedrock people who raised their families here. I was at a luncheon earlier this year of retired state employees. So these weren't a bunch of Tim Eyman acolytes, if you will. And one woman came to me, it was just after tax bills had come up, and she was very kind. She said, Mr. Wilson, I'm not mad at you, but I got your bill. And actually, the Treasury sends it out, not us, but I get the joy of responding to that. And she said, but I looked at the bill. I'm going to have to sell my house. I can't afford to live in King County anymore. That breaks my heart. I mean, we should honor those who helped build this community into what it is today by not putting them in a situation where we determine that because of our fiscal needs or our flawed fiscal system, they're going to have to simply become a financial casualty of prosperity. That makes no sense to me. And I think, you know, it's morally wrong, just plain and simple. And like you, Tom, I came from Minnesota, too.
Very good. I don't see any other questions.
John, are you done with this? Do you have more
Sure. Well, I think I got one more slide where we'll come to the end. So I'm going to wrap it up here with what we've already been talking about, but also hopefully offer you some hope. We have to fix this system. I think that is going to become all the more clear come February when tax bills arrive. We've already started a discussion. We've reached out to the Evans School at the University of Washington, the Foley Institute at WSU, and we've asked them to partner with us, and we've been partnering with County Executive Constantine to start a deep and broad statewide discussion on how do we modernize government and modernize our revenue system. And I'd ask all of you on the dais and you in the audience to be a part of that discussion, because I think we also live in a world where we can no longer count on Washington, D.C. or Olympia to solve our problems. It is going to have to become incumbent upon us as citizens, as elected officials that represent those citizens, to step forward and say there's got to be a better way. I think there is, and I think we all working together can find that better way.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager?
Yes.
I'd like to request that we be provided a hard copy of this presentation.
Absolutely. We'll be also will be on the website for everybody to have. John, as you further develop your numbers, if you could keep us informed.
Absolutely.
That would be great, and I'll make sure that we transfer that information to the council and to our community.
And we'd be happy to, as those evolve in that. Any questions any of you have, please feel free to get a hold of us, and we'll get back to you as promptly as possible.
I think we have a few closing questions now. Councilmember Huckabee and then Valderrama.
I actually have a comment. I'd like to understand how we become part of that discussion. I'm a CPA and a financial planner, and this year, for the first time ever, I've been introduced to a number of senior citizens who are using reverse mortgages to pay for their property taxes. None of them are going to die soon enough. At some point, that home is going to be worth nothing. They're struggling to stay there. We really need, if the exact situation you described is one that I was looking at, $50,000 a year in taxes and $12,000 a year of income. It's just not sustainable. And people want to stay in their home. They love their home. And it's unfortunate that people are being forced out of them. So if there's any way that I can make some input very strongly that we need to have a senior exemption or senior deferral or something that will allow people to stay and not get into that other very ugly system.
So on a couple fronts very quickly, we would be happy to come out and work with the city on how to outreach more to those potential seniors and that. Lyman and I have talked a bit about that already, and you guys have been very cooperative. Also, in terms of the larger tax modernization effort, shoot me an email. He knows how to get a hold of me. And what we're doing right now is we're meeting next week or the week after with someone from the Ruckelshaus Center for Dispute Resolution. We actually met with former Attorney General Ruckelshaus, and we're going to try to figure out how to design a process. We're looking at setting up an independent nonprofit to take this task forward. But I'm looking for people that would be willing to volunteer and put some time in as we conduct statewide discussions on what are the issues facing us and how we're doing. So I would welcome your help.
Thank you.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, I appreciate the presentations you've given. It's very good, John. The one thing that you didn't add in the slide before about additional consideration, these are not the only taxes that people are paying. So you've got the tab fees that have gone up for ST3, the sales taxes. So the total package is actually exasperated by those other ones beyond what you've given us that grim notice. And I think that's something to take into account, that the overall amount is greater. Additionally, I've understood that the state legislators, before leaving, while they didn't grant cities and counties addition to that 1% cap, did grant themselves an exemption to that 1% cap at the state level. So it added a little bit of salt to the wound.
It is funny how they managed to take care of themselves. I admire that. I wish we had that authority. You're right. I mean, I think, frankly, also as we look at any kind of modernization of service delivery and revenues, on the revenue side, part of what it has to be is a rebalancing of the variety of revenue sources. You know, it was interesting this year, with this being the first year that the Sound Transit ST3 property tax was on people's property tax bills. We actually did not hear that much from people about that. But man, did we get an earful about car tabs. You know, and I don't like to take the normal bureaucratic or such view of it ain't my job, man. But it ain't my job, man. And, you know, we would direct them to Sound Transit and licensing, and Sound Transit would grumble at us a bit. And we'd say, hey, baby, it's your MVET, not mine. But certainly, you know, it's part of what you have to be mindful of. And clearly, Sammamish has a track record of fiscal prudence and that one has to look at the totality of taxes that you're raising from the public, not just one particular tax, because it's that totality that is starting to weigh on people. That, you know, I heard it from somebody at noon today. They said, so you're raising my property tax, Sound Transit's raising my property tax, my car tabs are higher, and now the sales tax is over 10%. John, where does it stop? And, you know, I think there are a lot of good people that support their communities, have voted for a lot of things, but who are finding themselves increasingly going, where does it stop?
Exactly.
Deputy Mayor Malchow.
I just wanted to say thank you. I really do appreciate your time here. I hope our citizens have as well. Obviously, they'll be able to go back and watch this, but this has been very enlightening, and I really do appreciate your candor on a lot of this. I think getting to that candor is certainly appreciated by us as well as the community at large. So, thank you.
Well, thank you.
John, okay. Councilmember O'Dell.
John, I too want to thank you for coming out and having this very frank discussion with us. I found it very enlightening. I do have a question and some suggestions on where to look in the future. First of all, the port tax bite is 1.5%. I am a refugee from the airline business. I was a financial controller for Northwest Airlines. And I know that the port revenues, particularly on the air side, are profitable. So we're subsidizing the maritime side. But maybe it's time to take a look at that, and the Port of Seattle ought to stand on its own 2 feet instead of having everybody living here pay for it. The second thing is on the state side, a lot of our cost growth in our city right here is a good example of it's being driven by growth created by other organizations such as Microsoft, such as Amazon, et cetera. I have to wonder if they're paying their fair share of all this. On the east side of the state, there are many people over there, as you point out, whose properties are undervalued. I would encourage whomever is in this group you're putting together to take a hard look at that, plus the subsidies they get from federal lands, grazing rights, water irrigation benefits from the Grand Coulee Dam, that sort of thing. I mean, this is taxpayer funded. It's almost a gift of public funds in my eyes, but I'll leave that for another day. Another thing, too, is that in terms of subsidies, the state gave Boeing, my former employer, a huge subsidy with the Everett facility. At the same time, they have the chutzpah to turn around and blast Bombardier for accepting money from the province of Quebec. So that's a real double standard, and perhaps that is ground for looking at the future. I know there are other states out there that will pay to have Boeing come, and I frankly really don't want them to leave. But if Boeing wants a level playing ground, then maybe that should be part of the discussion, not just Boeing. Thank you.
Thank you.
John, I think those are all the questions for this evening. I would also like to thank you very much. This was really informative, and I appreciate the material. I have a feeling that for the next few days, a number of us will be going through the material as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Again, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate most of all your interest, all of you, in this. You know, it's a vital part of our community's future, and whatever we can do to collaborate in that, let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, it's been asked for a break, so we'll take 5 minutes, please. Okay. Here we go. I think at this point, we are on item 2, which is our last item for the evening. And Mr. City Manager, would you like to get us started?
Thank you very much. So I promised Angie Fesser, our Parks and Recreation Director, our full and undivided attention, and we had previously decided that we would not put her last on the agenda. So I do apologize that she again ended up there, but thank you very much for your flexibility, and she's got a really good update for us, bring us up to speed, up to where we are on the pro plan and the whole development of that. So without further ado, I will turn things over to her.
Thank you, Lyman. We're just saving the best for last, right?
That's it.
So good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the public. Tonight, we're going to be presenting a debriefing of the PRO plan. It's been a while since we've been in front of you, but a lot of work has been accomplished. We started the project in January of this year, and our target is to adopt this by the end of February of next year, which is actually right around the corner. This is a component of our comprehensive plan, and we update it every 6 years to remain eligible for state grant funding. Just a reminder, too, that we took on a chunk of the non-motorized plan into the PRO plan, so the recreation trails component of this work is a little bit larger than traditionally housed in the PRO plan. Since our last PRO plan, there's been a lot of changes since 2012. We built the Community and Aquatic Center, an annexation of more than 11,000 people, and we've increased our parkland by about more than 100 acres through annexation and donations as well. So tonight we're going to review the scope of the project. Again, just as a refresher, we're going to talk in depth about some of the public engagement, considerable amount of public engagement we've done over the last 8 months. And Steve's going to talk about some of the preliminary findings and core themes that we have been working on. The next step after this is a draft of this document, which will be reviewed by the public and staff, Parks Commission, Planning Commission in the next couple months, and come back to the full council in January. So with that, I'd like to introduce Steve Dew from Conservation Techniques. He's our consultant on the project.
Thanks, Angie. Good evening, council, mayor, and city manager, and members of the public. Again, my name is Steve Dew, Conservation Techniques, and as Angie mentioned, we're the lead firm helping the city pull together the update to the pro plan. So I put together a presentation. I'll walk you through a little about, just as a reminder, what the project is, where we are in time, and what we've heard to date from the public, and also some thoughts on what we're seeing in terms of how we're looking at your parks and recreation system. So in terms of putting the plan together, it, like many other public sector plans, is one that's got a lot of parts to it, and one that takes a little bit of time to get all those pieces in order. So as Angie mentioned, we started the project early this year with just some project grounding and foundation, just getting familiar with Sammamish and basically learning which way was up. And then we proceeded quickly into doing an inventory and assessment of your parks, your trails, recreation programs, facilities, and then started to work toward a fairly robust community engagement program, which is still ongoing, and I'll get to some details on that in a moment. Ultimately, the public process and the technical work that our professionals are doing will come together as a needs assessment for the plan document, and that in turn lends itself to the development of a project list, a capital project list, a capital improvement plan that'll help guide where the city invests over the next 6 to 10 years. And within the plan itself, we'll also identify implementation strategies, funding strategies, and other options for you to consider in terms of putting these plans or these projects together. And then ultimately going through a review and approval process later this year and early next. So this is just a quick snapshot of what the project timeframe looks like. Again, same sorts of elements on this graphic. I just wanted to highlight the overlay with the public involvement process. So we've planned for 3 community meetings. We've done 2 to date, and I'll touch on some results from those in a moment. There's a virtual town hall and a series of stakeholder sessions that were group-based. And then there's been online engagement throughout the course of the project. And also to start the project, we worked with the Land Acquisition Strategy Project to develop a joint community survey, which I know you're familiar with. So all in all, to date, this project itself has touched about 1,000 residents in terms of those folks who have given feedback or paid attention to the project. In terms of what we've heard to date, I just want to highlight some of the information about the public process. And to start off with the community survey, again, it's been a while since I've been in front of council to talk about the pro plan, and I know it was probably back in May when you had heard the findings of the community survey. So I'm just offering this as a refresher. So just as a reminder, the community survey was mailed out to 4,000 randomized addresses across the city back in March. Had a superb response rate of 22%. And typically for a mail survey, you're in the 8 to 10% range. So you're very, very high marks for the community on this. And it, I think, shows the level of interest that residents have about the topic of land acquisition, preservation, parks, outdoor recreation, and quality of life piece. So the response was very strong, and the data we got from it was also very useful and will be very useful for the development of the plan. Just to highlight a few things, a fair chunk of folks, 40%, say that there are not enough parks. And this specifically is a theme that you'll hear throughout the course of the public process and the other results I'll touch on in a moment. While about a majority say there are enough parks, there is a big piece of residents who feel that more parks are needed, and that includes land preservation and land acquisition to go with that. You've got a great usage of your parks with a majority of people using the parks at least once a week during the summer times, and about 93% of households who took the survey said they've used parks at least once during the year. So again, between folks who are using it on a regular basis at about half of the respondents and those who are using it a little more periodically, it's again, a superb response for usage of parks and trails across the city. Those parks that were most often utilized or referenced were Pine Lake, Beaver Lake, and Sammamish Commons. Turning to the virtual town hall, we had just shy of 400 folks look at the site and 142 respondents to the set of questions that were posed in the virtual town hall. And the good thing is that the respondents who did take or go to the site come from all different parts of the city. So it was fairly well distributed across the community. In terms of what people were saying in the virtual town hall, we basically asked two core questions. One is about big picture priorities. 38% of the respondents said that buying land for future parks and open space was their most important priority. And listed here are those top 5 priorities in rank order, just so you get a sense of where people are interested in having the city focused going forward. So buying land, again, links not only to those respondents from the community survey that said more parks are needed, but it also links to the land acquisition strategy program that you're currently working toward to implement the acquisition of additional open spaces across the city. Additionally, maintaining...
We have a question from Deputy Mayor Malchow.
So I'm back one slide. You don't have to go back on the deck, though, where it says 40% think there are not enough parks. And I think you highlighted the fact that then 60% do think there are enough parks. Is that, or is there a sliding scale in there?
Yeah, and I've got the data, if I could just pull it out really quick. But
I mean, it sounds like there's a super majority that think there are enough parks.
It was roughly 50% said there are enough parks, 40% who said there aren't enough parks, and 6% or so that said they didn't really know.
Okay, so I'm trying to match that up then with what I'm seeing here on the virtual town hall, which you married two ideas together on that first bullet point, which is buy land for future parks and open spaces, but then separated out on number 4, where it says develop new parks. I mean, the only reason you would acquire new land would be for new parks. So I guess in my mind, I'm trying to differentiate what our citizens are asking for. Are they asking for us to buy land for open spaces, which would be a more natural state for trails and that kind of stuff? Or are they desiring us to buy land for parks so that we can develop a new park and facilities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the way I interpret the information is they're asking for both, but there's a tendency to ask more for land preservation.
Okay.
There is interest in, active use park space and providing more amenities across the city, but I think the biggest thing we've heard throughout the public process, including the surveys, is the need for land preservation, including tree canopy, et cetera.
Okay, and that's kind of what I've heard too, but it's rolled up into one thing in that top bullet point, so I wanted to at least pick that apart a little bit. Thanks.
I have a question that I'm curious. On the virtual town hall, it says respondents were generally older. 47% were 50 or older. And I'm wondering if that would correspond in any particular way to active versus passive parks.
That's a good question, and I don't know if our data can be segmented to find an answer to that. The one thing to point out about the demographic difference between the virtual town hall and the community survey is that with the virtual town hall, we had higher percentages in the older age grouping who participated. So those perspectives are reflected in the priorities.
And then I'd also point out that the people with the virtual town hall self-selected themselves to answer the questions, whereas the original survey was done randomized.
Yes.
So you had a better cross-section on the original survey.
Thank you.
Sure.
I don't see any other questions, Steve. Keep going.
Another question that we had with the virtual town hall was about existing opportunities, things like parks, facilities within parks, trails, open spaces, and asked folks to rank from a list of 12 items what their top amenities are. Trails came out at the very top, and 25% of the participants in the virtual town hall said trails were the most important. In particular, this item is consistent not only with the community survey that ranked trails as the highest of importance of park-type facilities, but it's also consistent with regional and statewide statistics going back at least 2 decades. So folks like trails because they're generally easy to access, low cost, easy to utilize, and get people around and get to see the community. So it's no surprise here that when given the choice, people ranked trails toward the top or at the top. But again, open space also very close to the top, and again is in alignment with what we heard through land acquisition strategy and the community survey of the notion of preservation. Moving on to the open houses, and there's 2 that I'll touch on.
Before we move on, I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question on the virtual town halls. Was there a limit on the number of times an individual could respond?
Angie?
Yes, I believe the way the virtual town hall is set up, it does recognize the user, and they're only allowed to do it once.
Okay.
So you couldn't complete it multiple times.
Thank you.
So the first community open house occurred back in late May, and it was held here. And we had about 16 to 18 folks attend that session, and we structured it around small table group discussions, so community members could talk to each other about things that were important to them, and they were able to work through a series of questions that we posed as a project team to come up with their ideas of things that were important, things that needed to be addressed in the pro plan, and things that need special attention going forward. So I've just highlighted some of the common responses that we heard from that series. So folks were interested in having parks and facilities to be more multi-use or multi-purpose, so more amenities and different types of amenities within the parks. Again, protecting natural areas and acquiring more land for, again, parks and open space, as well as expanding programs. So the discussion of programs really is one thing that's special and unique to this pro plan update, in that the 2012 plan focused more on the facility side of getting the facility next door in the plan and ready for it to move forward. And with this pro plan, we're looking at recreation programming as an area of opportunity for either the city to move forward with as a lead or as a partner to expand options for recreation programs for residents. And it's coming through in the community outreach that we're hearing. The second open house we did was just a few weeks ago, and it was at the last of the season's farmers market. I know some of you came and attended and gave your feedback, and I appreciate that. And that was a series of displays that had leading questions or teaser questions to get people thinking. They could write on maps, use dots to vote, use coins to vote or allocate funds, and give feedback in that way. In terms of top facility priorities, again, acquisitions and natural open space preservation were at the top with trails. So you're starting to see consistency between the different outreach that we're doing. For programming, folks were asked to help allocate funds across 4 different kinds of program areas. General interest for youth and adult was the highest priority area, and for your reference, general interest could include things like educational classes, arts, crafts, activities, those sorts of things. And then with regard to how people interpreted the map displays and had a chance to interact with those, There were comments about interest in additional waterfront parks or access to the lake, adding various trail connections, and finishing the East Lake Sammamish Trail, and also tying it to the future light rail station as well. Other comments that came out were things about focusing on additional toddler-oriented play equipment. Many of the play areas in the city are geared more toward slightly older kids, not the 2 to 5 age group. So some folks who came through pointed that out. Interest in making improvements for ADA enhancements for connectivity within parks and through parks. So tying hard surface pathways, for example, to picnic areas, to the waterfront, to making sure that folks have easy and universal access to the various park amenities that you do offer. And also there was several comments about focusing on teen center or activities for teens and teen center needs, especially including the arts. I mentioned earlier that there was a series of stakeholder sessions. There were 3 group discussions, and we organized them topically. So there was one group that was a series of representatives from folks interested in the environment, another about athletics and sports, and another about recreation programming. You can see who was participating at those. Within the environmental stakeholder group, again, preserving existing open space, acquiring more land, partnering with land trusts and developers to secure and protect land also came out of those discussions. On the athletic side, no surprise, interest in having additional fields be available, converting existing fields to synthetic turf so they can be played on year-round and expand the season, as well as improving coordination between the different sport organizations to have a much tighter scheduling program.
Steve, I have a question from Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to wait till he finishes this slide. Yes.
Fair enough. Thank you. And on the programming side, there was interest or discussion about additional programs for seniors and increasing the diversity of programs. And I'll come to recreation programming itself in a little bit with a series of slides to dive a little deeper into that.
What I was going to mention on the programming side, and I appreciate your reaching out, and some of these are small groups, some of these are medium. One group that we had recommended to the Health and Human Services that I don't see here is the Knights of Columbus. That Knights of Columbus group is bigger than the Kiwanis, twice as big, at least, of the Kiwanis and Rotary together at one church, and they may be at other churches as well. So that's somebody you should really touch to base with on as you go forward.
Thank you. Good point.
I'd like to just make one comment. Back on the first community open house, it said missing and needed features and amenities, and one of the last points was some form of transit to parks and programs. And actually, since then, we have 3 of the parks connected: Beaver Lake, Pine Lake, the Commons, and the north end is Evans Creek Reserve, as well as Bill Reams?
Bill Reams, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so there's 4 connected parks.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And I was just trying to go a little quicker just for your time. So thank you for pointing that out. So aside from the public outreach that we've done to date, which I just walked through, we also conducted on-site inventories and assessments. So within my staff, I've got landscape architects who are registered and are professionals in parks and recreation, and went around and visited every park property and the open spaces, documented what was there, opportunities for enhancements, improvements, opportunities for ADA compliance issues, and just looking at generally how the site is, how it's used, and the feedback we got from that analysis is you're in really good place on the parks you have. And honestly, you should be really proud of the parks that you've got and the way they're designed, and the way they're functioning. So the photos that are on this particular slide are from my landscape architect on a random day. They're not special photography photos. These are just snaps from a phone. So they all look really good. And I think, again, you should be proud of the facilities that you're offering to the public, because they do look well and they are well used and well loved. What we did find, though, are a few minor ADA or American with Disability Act compliance issues, and I'll stress minor on that. And there's some opportunities for additional or better wayfinding to and from parks. So basically what that means is enabling signage to have folks know where a park is, how to get to it, where the entrances are, when they get there, what's in the park, and where those things are, and so they can start to see what's available, how it's connected, and how to better utilize what you offer.
Great. Steve, I was waiting for you to finish that slide because Deputy Mayor Malchow has a question.
So I'm glad you went into a little bit more detail on the wayfinding, but I'm wondering, was that specific to a particular park? The wayfinding part? Like once you're at a park, where to go, that element of it? I mean, Evans Creek Preserve comes to my mind, all the winding trails that are not necessarily marked and you wonder where you're going to come out.
Right. Honestly, I would have to look back at the notes to see which particular parks had issues or comments about wayfinding, but as a system, I'm just trying to summarize that there are opportunities to improve signage so folks are aware of where they will come out when they go into a trail. You want to add anything, Angie?
Just two things. We do know that we have some parks that could use some enhancements in wayfinding, but like Beaver Lake Preserve is a good example that there's, signage, there's posts at every intersection with directions of where to go and good mappage. And our goal is to have that throughout our park system, but that does take time. But another piece of this is actually road signage for our parks. When you're driving down a road, a lot of people may not even know there's actually a park at that driveway. So it's one of those things that it took a consultant to kind of tell us that, oh, you realize you don't have much signage on the way to the park. And then we realized we do have that. So I think there's some great opportunities that were identified in here that are quick fixes that will help tremendously with the wayfinding.
Great. I have Councilmember Jarrett and then Councilmember Huckabee.
Thank you. I was thinking about this. It seems that we could have a map like we have for the permits, showing projects, have a map showing all the parks, and you hit on it and it gives you all the details. And then you could actually have a smartphone app which you could pull up. So if you're in a park and you want to know the trail, you can pull up the map.
Right.
That would be pretty easy. I know I was on a
Garmin
hike.
already does that.
Yeah, I was on a, pardon me?
Garmin, the bands, my son's watch can pull up any trail and run them.
Yeah. Well, I was on a hike to Lake Tradition. I parked in Issaquah and headed up a trail, and the trails aren't marked.
No,
I
they're
headed
not.
up this one trail and ended up at a power pole. That was the end of the trail. Then finally I decided, well, pull out my phone and see where I am. And indeed, you could just follow with Google. But I mean, an app which is linked to on our website sure would help, I think.
Great comment.
Councilmember Huckabee.
Yes, I was just going to comment because I have a number of friends that like to hike and walk. And you mentioned, why don't we go to the Lower Commons? Well, where is that? What is that? And we live on Southeast 4th, and that little sign is so tiny. People just whip right by it. And if they're not aware that there's this gorgeous, beautiful park there, they just, from that signage, they don't see it. So I'm delighted to hear that you're going to be increasing that, because I think that park, like some others, are underutilized simply because people don't know the existence.
Right, exactly.
All right. So again, thinking back about what we've heard to date from the public via the surveys and the open houses, et cetera, plus the inventory analysis that we've done, I've tried to summarize some core themes, kind of the takeaways. Some of this will be a little repetitive because I've stressed some of these elements already, so bear with me. But in terms of core themes, one that really stands out is the notion of taking care of what you have. And this is where maybe Sammamish is not that unique from other communities, because typically when you ask a resident what should happen with a park, or are you interested in acquiring more lands or doing X, Y, and Z, their first response, or the most common response, is, well, just maintain what you have before you do anything else. And here again, residents of Sammamish have said similar sorts of things, such that there's interest in improving and upgrading existing parks, making sure that they're fully utilized to their full potential, adding some elements like drinking fountains or restrooms or picnic shelters, things like that, to improve utilization and give more variety, improving the wayfinding and signage like we've talked about. ADA compliance, this one in particular is something that we'll call out more attention to in the document itself, but for reference, if you look at the slide with the picture of the picnic table on a concrete pad, that concrete pad technically isn't ADA accessible for two reasons. One, it doesn't have a hard surface pathway to the picnic table, and two, the design of the table itself doesn't accommodate a wheelchair next to it. So these are the sorts of things that we looked at when we did our inventory assessment, and we'll call those out in the document. So for each park, we'll know more specifically what sorts of improvements would need to be made to bring these up to compliance. And more often than not, with your system, these are fairly minor fixes. So again, I think that says a lot for what you've got. And the other piece I want to add about ADA is with regard to benches, tables, and other sorts of amenities like that, you're not obligated to have every bench or table ADA accessible, just a portion of them. So again, it's not such that you have to cover your whole system with paved pathways to get to things, but you just have to have reasonable accommodations to accommodate universal access. Another core theme is expanding opportunities that, again, through the survey and through the public process, we've heard interest from a variety of folks about adding different elements or expanding opportunities for different elements within your parks and recreation system, specifically about ball fields, either adding new fields or converting some to synthetic to, again, enable year-round play. Making trail connections and expanding the trail system that you currently have to accommodate longer loops or cross-town connections. The land acquisition piece is in here, and again, links back to the land acquisition strategy, as well as expanding options for other amenities like picnic shelters or gardens and restrooms, like I mentioned earlier. And several people noted their interest in getting more access to the lake, whether it's acquiring more lakefront property or doing other improvements to enable the use of waterfronts across the city. Protecting nature and access to it, again, this ties it very strongly to land acquisition strategy and the conversation the community's having about tree canopy and urban forestry. So protecting stream corridors, wildlife environs, and just making sure that open space lands are protected for future and for future generations. Next, I want to...
I'm sorry, Councilmember
Is there a
O'Dowd.
question?
Yeah, could you go back one slide, please?
This one or the one before?
This particular one. As we design parks, and particularly trails through parks, we need to be sure that they're compatible with the wildlife that may be resident there as well. One of the things I've noticed on the East Lake Sammamish Trail is extended stretches where chain link fence is on both sides of the trail. And frankly, that is an obstacle to everything from a fawn down to a smaller animal, such as a mink or otter, trying to get from where it's living to or from the other side. So I think where we do have a fairly heavy wildlife presence or possibility, that this needs to be one of the factors in the facility design.
Great point. Thank you.
Just a question or clarification. Those fences, aren't those King County fences? That they're-
They are, but frankly, I think we should have some discussion with the county on that. It's just simple holes every so
Angie's got an interesting face.
You still have chain link fences, but you could also put pass-throughs every so often so the animals can't get from one end to the other.
Put holes in the fence.
That too.
Great, Steve.
All right, next I want to walk you through a series of maps, and this is in the hope of demonstrating some of how we think about parkland distribution and parkland access across the city. So things get a lot easier now that we've got computer mapping and everybody's got a phone that's got an app on it and you know where you are at all times. But it also makes my job a little easier as a park professional to help you think through what you've got, where things are located, and where there might be gaps in your system. So we do this gap analysis to basically look at parkland distribution and whether the community has a reasonable walking distance. And for us at this stage, we're saying reasonable is about a half-mile walk or a 10-minute walk. So keep that in mind as I go through. So with the first map, we were just looking at, I'll go back, we were just looking at city parks and some of the other public park lands that are available, as well as those blue squares are school district properties. We add to that all of the existing homeowner association properties, both private open spaces and private HOA parks. So you can tell just by going between the two, there's a significant addition by all of the private open space that's within the city. So one thing that a gap analysis does, again, helps us think about who has access to a park. Back a few years ago, before computer mapping became as robust as it is today, people would just draw circles on the map, and those circles were conceptual, and they would represent a half mile. So these are half-mile circles on a map, just to give you a frame of reference. And the problem with drawing circles on a map is they're detached from reality in that you don't have wings and you can't fly across a ravine or you can't go where there are no roads. So the circle on the map concept breaks down pretty fast. So nowadays we have access to a lot more data and we can analyze it such that we can say for every park we can identify a specific park entry. Any legitimate entry to a park we identify with a pin drop on a map, just like you would if you're looking for directions to go someplace on your phone. Drop the pin and figure it out. So for each park we have a pin drop, and that's an access point. And then from each access point, we say travel on a road network, you know, quarter mile, half mile, mile, whatever the distance is. And then draw a big, funny looking polygon around that to say this is a half mile or a quarter mile. And we call those walk sheds. So what we've done here is for the neighborhood parks, we've identified quarter mile and half mile walk sheds based on the road network. And again, that half mile represents about a 10-minute walk. So you can start to see the difference between the circles on the map and the road-based walk shed. And this just is a little more refined about who legitimately lives within a half mile of access points. So we add to that then the HOA parks. But we also trim the HOA polygons to the boundaries of the HOA, in the sense that those private HOA parks are private and they're for the folks who live within that subdivision. They're not intended for the general public. We just wanted to identify them on the map, but also respect that ownership of them being private, and they serve a role, but that will just help inform potential gaps as we go forward. We do the same for community parks, but in this case we do quarter mile, half mile for walking, and then add a mile and a 2-mile distance to just recognize the fact that these are larger parks. They have parking, they have athletic fields, they have a lot more uses going on. So people are driving to them. So because they're driving to them, it's a larger catchment area. And then we put them all together. So we put the community parks, neighborhood parks, the homeowner parks all together, and we've trimmed those community parks to just the half mile, just to show all of those parks that are walkable within a half mile distance. And to that, we add, in gray on this one, those areas that are sensitive lands. And what this composite map shows us really is those areas that are in white represent areas that are, in essence, gap areas where folks have to travel more than a half mile to get to a park. But this also is a way to help inform what could be tied to the land acquisition strategy about finding those gaps and starting to prioritize where those areas that are white need attention or focus in the near term to either protect them for open space or protect them for active use parks. So I just wanted to walk you through kind of the thinking on the mapping on that. And are there any questions on the mapping?
I'm sorry, I'm just so into this. Councilmember Jaron.
A couple of comments. One, the gray areas are sensitive areas, steep slopes, or what?
Yes, there's steep slopes, wetlands, landslide areas, and they're all composite. They're all just added together.
Because I couldn't see it on the legend.
I didn't segment them. Yeah, there's no legend on this particular one for that.
And the other thing is, take for example, Big Rock Park. The southern portion of it is white right up to the park, whereas there are roads that go to the park there. So I don't know why that's not included.
Do you want to answer that?
Well, actually, because Big Rock Park B, the piece that's shown here, is not open to the public currently. So we didn't include that in the analysis.
Well, I understand, but it'll probably be open by the time this gets completed. The other question I have is in King County.
Maybe not.
You show some of the King County preserves, but north of Soaring Eagle Park, the county's been acquiring land, and actually there's more green that shows there as part of our Emerald Necklace efforts.
Indeed. And we've got that on other versions of the same map that we'll use as updated files as we go forward. So we'll add the DNR property as well as the expanded King County properties as well.
Councilmember Odell.
Thanks. I have about three things. First of all, I caught the same thing Don did on Big Rock Park, and once that does open up, that area that's white will become a different color, and that particular park desert, to coin a term, won't be desert anymore.
Exactly.
On going back to the open houses we had, I had a very clear impression that the open space issue, preservation of open space, acquisition of open space, took higher priority among the crowd I was with, at least, than traditional parks. And I think Councilmember Malchow asked about the other side of the coin. It's about 50% were okay with the number of parks we had. On the toddler equipment thing.
On the what?
Toddler equipment issue. There was a chart several back that talked about youth playgrounds and that sort of thing. The community I grew up in had pocket parks and neighborhood parks every so many blocks. And one of the things that we may wish to look at, or at least the council in the future may wish to look at, is a change to land use code in a couple of different areas. First of all, if the development's over, say, X number of units, there may be a need or could be a requirement to insert a pocket park of some sort in that development, which would help in a lot of the white spaces here, particularly down in the southwest part of town, where there is still a fair amount of vacant land. The second thing is, as we look at future developments, we may want to look at multi-purposing the parks from the standpoint of maybe they're not just parks. Maybe we duplicate what happened in Heritage Hills, where I happen to live, where the park serves a couple of different functions. One is it is a park, no question about that, but it is also a large stormwater facility that's grassed. So 9 or 10 months out of the year, it is available as open space parkland, and there's a soccer field set up there. When it rains heavily, the park turns into Lake Heritage, and unfortunately, it's not full enough to stock it long enough. But those are the sorts of things that I think would be a nice enhancement from the standpoint of a number of things. One is providing amenity to that particular development that is unique, solving a stormwater issue, and thirdly, helping with the tree canopy preservation effort that the council is very much interested in. So I hope that as you go through the pro plan process, you somehow find a way to work these three themes into it.
Great points, thank you. And yeah, one thing that we already have started to think about is what you mentioned with regard to multiple use of public spaces. So whether it's public works going out to purchase lands for stormwater, are there opportunities for parks and open space to work with public works on that for multiple uses of the same lands? And that's something that we'll consider in the park plan. Yep.
Great, Steve.
All right, moving on. So following the gap analysis and kind of the mapping exercise, it does translate a little bit into looking at your levels of service. So there's three basic ways to look at levels of service for parks and open spaces. And this is the investment per capita option, which is the sum total of your investments divided by the number of folks who live in the community. And that's what's currently used in your park impact fee methodology. Another is geographic equity or distribution, which is more or less what I just walked through with the mapping. And a third is a more traditional numeric of acres per thousand, which the city's moved away from, but it's still a useful tool to look at. So with regard to investment per capita, again, it's part of your current park impact fee methodology, and it's at $81 per capita, which when we looked back at national median data, that it's just slightly below national data. So if you're looking at national statistics, Sammamish is pretty close to where many other communities across the country are in terms of their investments per capita. In looking at the geographic distribution, if we looked at that last map and started to target potential areas that could suit active use parklands, community parks, neighborhood parks, and those sorts of spaces, and start to drop circles on a map, tentatively we can find spots for about 8 neighborhood parks and a community park. And that sounds like a lot, and it may be, but again, if we're looking out to 2035 or so, the community may change a lot in terms of development in those years, and having a plan in place to think about where parks might need to go is really the point of the pro plan, and it's better to have it on the map and make the decision in the future rather than not consider it yet. So again, there may be lots of circles on that map, but if you also look at acres per thousand or acres per capita, today you're currently providing 4.4 acres per thousand residents. And if we were just to use that as a benchmark and say, okay, going forward with the projected population out to 2035, how many acres would you need to just maintain that level of service of 4.4 acres? And it's about 60 acres. So you would grow your park system by about 60 acres to maintain that acres per thousand. And what I find interesting as we went through this set of numbers is there's a strong correlation between that acres per capita number of the need for 60 additional acres and that geographic distribution. So if we assume a community park's about 30 acres and a neighborhood park's in the order of 4 to 5 acres, if you do the math between that 8 neighborhood parks and a community park, that is about 60 to 70 acres in total. And then looking at the acres per thousand, it matches up. It just worked out that way. We didn't plan it that way, but it's a way to cross-check our numbers and see if we're close. Not to say that it has to be these specific numbers in the plan, but it's, again, a frame of reference for us.
Great. I have a question from Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Yeah, 62 acres is a lot. I mean, it's nice to aspire to, but we're certainly competing with school districts for acreage as well. But I did have a question with that acres per thousand and population. I assume that Soaring Eagle was not incorporated into that calculation, and while I know most of it is in King County, there's a small portion in Sammamish, but boy, that sure feels like a Sammamish park since it's kind of, Sammamish comes right around it. Was that calculated in at all?
The county lands were not included.
Okay.
It was just the city properties.
So not
the
even,
30
so
acre.
Evans Creek Preserve not included either, or was?
It's our property.
It was.
But it's outside.
Yeah, but it's our
But
property.
it's not a park
Well, it's,
space, right? Is that what you're calling it?
That's how it was designated on the map.
Well, so is Hazel Wolf.
feels like a park to me. But Soaring Eagle, was that included or was not?
Spring Eagle was not included.
okay.
And I would have to go back to the calculations to confirm whether the preserves were part of that 4.4 acres.
I'm not sure, but I would assume they would be, and because Evans Creek Park, even though it's outside, or Evans Creek Preserve, excuse me, even is outside city limits, it's owned and maintained by the city, so we include that in our inventory.
Okay.
It's a different color than the parks. It's shown as open space, not park.
So their question is basically,
For Lake
is open
Preserve.
space included into parks inventory?
Which is kind of an interesting thing if you think about it, because I think most people, I mean, I would certainly, when I go and run in there, I feel like I'm running in a park. So,
Yes. It would be, following up on the question, I think it would be really important for us to know, because I think those two facilities particularly, as well as some others, people use them as parks, use them for recreation.
Absolutely.
And we should incorporate that into our concept. Maybe if it's even a sub-part of parks in some way, but they should certainly be there as they're being well used.
Confirm that and communicate that to the council in the next couple of days.
I would just make a comment about Evans Creek Preserve, though, that's interesting, because you were talking about putting a point on the map and drawing a circle around it, or looking at the walkability, and basically from the city limits, that park is unwalkable for most people, for a lot of people. I
Like
should
me.
say a lot, yes.
My wife.
So the entrance really isn't a walkable entrance
Right.
in your calculations.
Right.
People do walk down from the plateau and then come back up.
Yep.
I agree, but it's not everybody that's going to do that.
No, I understand that.
Point, yeah.
And that's a great point. And just to clarify, I suppose, on those maps that you saw, those walk sheds were calculated for the traditional active use park spaces, so the neighborhood parks, the community parks, not the preserves and other open spaces that the city has. So we can certainly add that and make the analysis that much more interesting and robust going forward, and streamline this set of recommendations, which these aren't even recommendations yet. This is just an outgrowth of what we've looked at, but we'll keep that in consideration.
Great. Councilmember Odell has a question.
Question and a comment. What's the cost of the 62 acres if we bought it?
Right.
depends on where it is.
What's the average cost?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, you could look at waterfront property versus, critical areas. And there's a big range in between. We really don't have an average per acre cost of land right now. Even with all our land acquisition work, the range is so wide that we don't even have a number that we function with or operate with.
If it's $500,000 an acre, which is probably conservative, that's $30 million. That is one reason I picked up on the theme of requiring developments to actually build the parks as part of the cost of the development. That way, the primary user, which is the houses in that neighborhood, actually pick up part of the cost as the purchase price of their house, and not the rest of the taxpayers in the city.
That is required now of subdivisions.
I believe so, that open space and recreation facilities are provided within developments.
And then those that also do not provide that, there is the impact fee that is collected as well. The other thing, I think as we move forward with the acquisition strategies, it will become clearer to the council on what properties are available. We have our list of, I guess, potential targets, and they do vary widely, primarily dependent on the topography and its potential for development would be the best way to describe it. If it's developable land, it's probably closer to $1 million an acre if it's unencumbered. But then other properties that are encumbered, the price tag goes down dramatically.
That's why I use the $500,000 number.
Yeah, so please stay tuned as we go through that land acquisition strategy and start fleshing that out, or actually applying it, for a better term. I think it'll become clear what we can buy for what. But it is, 62 acres is significant.
It is, yeah.
And I might add to that too, though, not all land needs to be acquired through purchase. That there are grant opportunities, there are donations available, there's leveraging of resources, so, and easements. There's a lot of different ways to acquire property rather than pure purchase, so.
Okay, Steve, oh, sorry, Councilmember Huckabee.
All right, just, one more.
I do have one comment or one question. Is the additional property that is eventually going to come to us from Big Rock Park included?
No, not.
That would actually reduce that 62
Right,
acre
there's
need.
20 acres right there.
How many?
20, I believe, is
20.
the
So that's a
last piece,
huge
the last-
chunk of that
Right.
62. Somehow I think that needs to be footnoted, because it
Yes.
sounds like we've got this overwhelming need, and yet we've got this plum sitting out there from this very generous contributor who is going to provide us with a significant acreage to fill that need. And especially since it's in the center and it's going to link a lot of these parks, it is just an amazing opportunity, or an amazing benefit to the city, because you're going to, we have the emerald necklace on the outside, but we're going to have this incredible knitting of the park space in the middle of the city once all that is done.
Right.
Just a quick comment too. It didn't appear to me that the Boys and Girls Club property is figured in here either when I look at.
Sorry, the
map.
Boys and Girls Club, what?
Excuse, I'm sorry, not the Boys and Girls Club,
Oh.
the YMCA property. That is,
You mean the community center?
no, next
No,
to.
you can see it. It's
Oh,
Pine
the
Lake
property by Pine Lake.
Not
yeah.
yet in these numbers.
It's not in these
Correct.
numbers, right? It didn't look like it was on the map anyway.
You know, this map is a little too small.
Yes.
But what I'm looking up here, you know, is much more visible, but looking on a piece of paper, it's really hard to pick out some of these things.
But going along with what you were, the point that you were making.
Yes.
That's another 5 acres or so.
25.
Indeed.
Great,
All
thank you,
right.
Steve.
So transitioning a little bit to recreation now, recreation programming. Just a few more slides, so hopefully it doesn't take too much longer to get through the rest of this. I know it's getting late. But with regard to recreation programming, I mentioned earlier that this plan is going to focus a little more heavily on recreation programming and what options the city might have for either being a leader in programming or being a facilitator and supporter of programming going forward with partnership arrangements such as it has with the Y and other organizations across the community. So just for a frame of reference, last year the city sponsored and hosted 67 special events. Special events is really the core area where city recreation staff put their time in terms of organizing, facilitating, and supporting events for the community takes up a substantial amount of time, and 67 events is a lot of events for a community as well. So the city's approach has been to look to other organizations to be the primary provider of recreation, whether that's the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, the school districts, other private organizations, to kind of fill that niche for providing programs. If the city wanted to move forward with doing more of its own programming, two basic questions have to get answered. Where will they be housed, and how are they going to be staffed? So staffing is going to need to be addressed if programming is going to grow, because currently staffing levels for recreation staff are just low, because the core focus, again, has been on special events, not additional programming. So what that future looks like is part of the question as to what we develop in this upcoming pro plan.
I have
So this is just a quick snapshot of the range of program areas that are available in the community currently. And you can see there the special events are an item covered by the city. Other organizations provide the bulk of the rest of the types of recreation or recreation offerings across the city, and a handful are contract provided. But really the big partners are the YMCA, the school district, the different sport leagues that are here. But what came out of looking at programming in this way, in terms of what are the program areas and who's doing them, are that there are a few that come out as needing some more attention going forward, because there's minimal activities for these types of program areas currently, and they may need to grow in the future. And that includes adult sports, general interest for youth and adult, again, that references like educational classes, arts and programs and those sorts of things. Special need programming for youth and adult, and senior programming. So those 4 areas were the 4 areas that we utilized during that second open house a couple of weeks ago to ask about where people wanted to put their money, so to speak. They had coins and they allocated funds, and it was that general interest area where most people put their resources toward.
Steve, I have a question from Councilmember Huckabee.
Thank you. I have a question and a couple comments on programming. I'm actually surprised that youth programming is not listed on here, and I know that certainly the YMCA is doing a lot in terms of youth programming, as well as providing jobs for youth in our community. However, one of the things that we keep running up against that I think at some point the city is going to need to consider, I'm happy allowing other groups to do the programming. The real issue is we don't have a place to do it. Arts East is very happy to come and do art programs. Frances Hoffman came and talked about, she was doing theatrical and musical training for young kids, opera, other singing. We don't have a place to have that anymore. She's no longer allowed to use the Boys and Girls Club. We talk about doing community building events, and I look at our sister city right close to us with a very small community center. They have teen dances. We don't have teen programs. They have 500, 600 kids show up. The question is, where do we put those sort of things in the community, or have a barn dance for adults? It's not just senior programming, it's youth programming and a variety of others. The real lack that I see is a place to do these things on any kind of scale that really responds to what the community's desires are. And that's the frustrating thing I hear all the time. There's nothing to do here. Nothing that my teens can do. When my teens have left and I'm a senior as an empty nester, there's nothing to do. I have to go to Issaquah, Seattle, Bellevue, someplace else. And so to me, it's a major lack, and the big lack is the facility. We can always have other people come and do it. The other comment that I wanted to make is on trails. There's been a lot of discussion on Safe Sammamish and some other social media about whether we need more trails. And I think people are a little confused about trails. It's such a broad concept. I would like to get a better sense from this next open house and from other comments that we're receiving, what kind of trails people would like to have. We happen to move from an area where we couldn't walk to parks. We now have the privilege of living on Southeast 4th, where despite the fact that you might have to take your life in your hands for the first 2 blocks, we can reach the Commons, we can reach Big Rock Park. We have incredible places. Trail connections would be amazing for other people in that if you drew a big circle around those parks, people can't get to them. They have to drive to them, so we had to provide parking places. If we had trails that people could walk to those parks safely, I think we'd get much more use out of those parks. And I think the community would be much more supportive of those trails that actually lead to someplace, a connection that would allow them to walk to the grocery store, would allow them to walk to services, would allow them to walk to other parks. And as we were talking last night at Sammamish Friends, there's this big push on doing the emerald necklace. But the point is, how do you get to the emerald necklace from your home? Can you ride your bike there? Can you walk there? Is there a trail? Or do I have to get in a car to get to some place so I can access the emerald necklace? So I think focusing on trails in the different categories, people tend to sometimes think about, well, let's do trails. They're thinking of the trail on East Lake Sammamish Parkway, big trail, wide trail, bike trail, regional trail, as opposed to little tiny trail connections that will allow them to access services rather than walking 4, 5, 6 blocks or having to get in a car to get there. And I'd like to get a better sense of where people are coming from when they say, yes, I want more trails, or no, I don't want trails, what it is their thought process is and what they're thinking of is in those different categories.
All right, thank you. Those are good points.
I don't see any other questions here, so I just have a couple of comments. On this needs programming, cultural arts, youth, and I'm looking at, there's no connection, right, on the chart, on either where we have coverage and where we have no coverage, and where we have no coverage, so we're not emphasizing that. So is that something we're not going to stress then, we're not going to look at? Because arts in general is not.
I don't know what cultural arts is. Is that painting, singing?
I'm looking at just arts in general. There's no comment in any category other than.
And that's a good catch, so thank you for pointing that out. And this information's coming through one of our project team members who is in the process of updating his analysis and taking it to the next step of making sure that it not only covers what it's supposed to, but include some ideas about options and things to think of going forward, whether it's facilities-based or program delivery-based. And the cultural arts piece is one piece that he's going to be putting more attention to going forward. So it's one area that we will be looking more at.
I'd like to make one more comment also. I may have made this at another meeting. It's something that I brought up in almost every meeting that I've been at, aside from Route 269, and that's our circulator bus, if you will, or temporary. Central Washington University mailed out a flyer that showed seminar program series that lecture series that they're offering. I hope everybody has seen that. I'm disappointed that I could not. I had a conflict. I couldn't make it to the first one. I wanted to see what the attendance was like. So I'm wondering, that actually is an amenity to our city, and so I'm wondering if that's something that we should be looking at and including in some of our analysis if we talk to them and partner with them. I have 2 other questions then from Councilmember Odell and then Deputy Mayor Malchow.
My question's really another comment or observation, and that is that our city has basically followed the contract approach, otherwise known as virtual city to some people, on provision of services, and generally it's worked pretty well. But when we get to something like this and we rely on another organization to provide the service, we are sometimes disappointed. This council has had some discussion recently about the Boys and Girls Club and the shortcomings there. They were supposed to provide senior services. That hasn't happened. It now appears that the after-school team program is in jeopardy.
It's gone.
Or has disappeared. So we may have to, particularly seeing as we have 1/3 of our population, or roughly 20,000 people, who are in the youth category. Some are barely walking, but others are, that need to have some things provided for them. We, as a city, as a council, may have to step up and figure out how we're going to do this as a city, as opposed to hiring someone to do it. And the biggest need, frankly, is, well, there's a year-round need for sure, but one of the bigger needs is in the summer. And frankly, that's when we have some local talent available that could, in fact, run programs in the parks we do have, that kind of thing. Yes, we do have a problem with places to put them, but we still do have some city facilities. The Beaver Lake Pavilion could become a focal point for this sort of thing, and that might be a better use for the community than trying to rent it out for the odd group here and there. So I think that is something I would encourage the future council to look into. What can we do ourselves? Can we do it better? That's could be fee-based, but not necessarily require joining an organization that you may not want to join to be able to partake of it. A lot of the programs offered through the community center require you to join the Y. Not everyone wants to do that. And I think those people in some ways feel left out. So my 2 bits on the subject.
Councilmember Huckabee and then Councilmember Jaron.
No, that's me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Deputy Mayor Malchow.
I thought he was going to say what I was going to say, which is, I really think that the adult education under other organizations ought to be shaded, because we now have Central Washington University providing education for adults.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jaron.
Yes. I just wanted you to know that. With the buttons.
I see.
I wanted to point out that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. City Manager, but the Boys and Girls Club agreement simply said that they would provide the time during the day available for senior services. They weren't going to provide the senior services, and either the city or someone else would have to step up to provide them.
Correct. That was
I
going to
stand
be
corrected,
time available.
Right.
But we didn't do it.
No, we didn't.
Well, actually, I would point out that it was done on several occasions, particularly with several different art groups that came in and did art with the seniors, and also tied in seniors, as I believe, well as the youth, and made connections that way.
Which also points out, under cultural arts, I don't know if we've had art events here, an arts fair. I don't know if you consider those cultural or not.
Sure. Well, and dances and things like that.
So it'd be under special events, but subcategory.
Go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say, one thing I will point out that we will try to flesh out as we do this program is we've identified a lot of need here. One of the concerns that the council has expressed going forward is the cost side of programming. And we have heard on several occasions the idea of, minding how much money we're spending. And most recreation programs that are done by cities historically, there are other models, but historically are not self-sufficient by programming costs. So just wanted to point that out to council. It will be something that does have budgetary implications. So I just thought I'd raise that.
But they can be partially offset by user fees.
Correct, and that's usually typically about 25%, historically offset by user fees. under most city programs. So 75% would be subsidized.
Councilmember Huckabee.
Yes, I was just going to make just a slight correction to something that Councilmember Odell said. Most of the Y Youth programs, Youth in Government, the Youth Environmental programs, many of the summer programs are offered to youth through funding through the annual campaign, and youth are not required to join the YMCA to participate in those programs. On the other hand, when the Platobians were going to offer a program for helping teens, the meetings were going to be held at the Boys and Girls Club, and they were going to be required to become members of the Boys and Girls Club to participate in those programs. So.
Okay. I have no more questions. Go ahead, Steve.
All right, thanks. So the discussion already about facilities is a very pointed one, and with this slide, I just wanted to reference that the primary indoor facilities that are owned by the city are operated by other organizations, and you know that better than I do. But the Lodge at Beaver Lake is really the only indoor facility that you own that you can program and use, and is fully controlled by the city, and has some indoor space that is programmable. So it's an area that we'll pay more attention to as we develop ideas about what sorts of programs might make sense to utilize that space. But there's also other indoor facilities that aren't currently being used for recreation programming, but all of them would need improvements to accommodate public functions, whether it's for accessibility or parking or other access. So there may be some other options for consideration, but again, facilities or access to facilities to accommodate programming is really the big flaw, so to speak, in providing programming going forward. On the athletic side, yeah.
Question. I'm sorry, this just came to me, and I'm curious about the why. There's open swim that anybody in the community can use it, and the rooms that are available that nonprofits and organizations use. Do we count that time as our community programming? Do we count that? I mean, it's a question. I'm not sure where it falls, but it does fall into delivering open community time.
And it's an interesting question, and I can confirm with our recreation planner to see how he's assessed that space and how he's thinking about it, because it's a valid question.
Right. I mean, we could literally, from a metric point of view, say that we have 50 nonprofits that we're scheduling.
We have two meeting rooms that are available and accessible.
Scheduled out all the time,
That's
from what I
correct.
understand, at the discretion of the city.
Yeah.
And as well as, like I say, there's an afternoon on Sundays that is open swim to the
Right.
community.
Well, and then we also have the library that has a community room as well.
There may be some of those things. I don't know that we should be capturing that, but maybe we should be.
Well, the other one that I would comment on also is the gym at Central Washington, which has now been sublet to the YMCA for programming.
I'm just speaking to, you don't have to be a member. I don't know how they're using the gym specifically.
Well,
with the
I was
Y
actually
for
going to-
Central Washington, but to go
Yeah.
to Councilmember Odell's question.
We were
about-
going to talk, I know that part of the idea for programming is to have community activities there. Frances Hoffman had met with him. The acoustics are not suitable for her to do her programming in that space. But I think that we might be able to do a father-daughter Valentine dance there.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you, Steve.
Yep. And the last slide of real content here tonight is with regard to athletics, so the athletic side of programming. And here again, athletics can be broken down into facilities and programs. So where are they playing? What fields are usable? So right now, there's the city has scheduling rights over the artificial turf field that's got 3 ball fields on it. But beyond that, there's other field complexes that add up to about 10 sport fields in the city, and none of those have lighting. So they are limited both in terms of playability because they're natural turf, and in terms of the seasonality because of lighting. So as we look at opportunities for programming and improvements for field space, we'll be looking at those fields in particular to see if there's options to improve utilization by either going to synthetic turf or potentially looking at lighting. We recognize that neighbors in neighborhood areas near the fields may have concerns about lighting, and so we'll pay attention to that as well and give some thoughts to that. But really the one takeaway with regard to sport fields and sports in general is there's currently more demand for field space than you have access to field space. And that is from your existing suite of youth athletics, from baseball, softball, soccer, but also from growing sports like lacrosse and specialized sports like cricket. There's just a demand out there for field space that, as the community grows and as school facilities continue to get utilized for school needs, there will be need to pay attention to access to field space going forward.
Steve, Councilmember Jarrand has a question.
Well, just a point of concern. When you look in the wintertime at those fields, and those kids are out there in the rain and the cold, and we have no indoor facility, you haven't mentioned the potential for the indoor soccer, lacrosse, et cetera, maybe even ice skating facility, whereas we have the designated property available for it. So don't forget it in the pro plan.
Thank you. We won't, and we'll definitely pay attention to that.
Soaring Eagle Park?
So that really wraps up the range of topics I wanted to cover with you tonight. Just to give you an update on where we are with the pro plan, what we've heard to date from the community, and kind of the things we're thinking about in terms of what will be going into the plan draft. Just by way of reference, we are planning our third community open house in about 5 weeks from now, so November 13th. And then between now and mid-January, we'll continue to work with the Park and Rec Commission to have discussions about the plan and your comments and the development of the document itself. In November, we will have a draft of the plan for staff review, public review, and starting to work with the commission on. And then ultimately going forward from December through February, getting into the more formal review and approval process with the Park and Rec Commission, the Planning Commission, and coming back to City Council in likely January and February. So that's it in a nutshell, and if there are other questions, I'm happy to entertain those.
Councilmember Valderrama has a question for you.
Excellent.
Okay, I saved my ammo for all of this time watching 8 rounds of some. So first of all, thank you for the presentation and the work that you've done. I'm a huge supporter of the parks. I'm on those parks, and I try to rotate daily, as Paul and Gene and others have seen me at different parks as we continue to use them. What is the number of acres we now have of parks in our city?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
I believe we're close to 600 right now. Right, Anjali?
That's with the open space.
What is the number?
660? Do you want to?
Like 200 of parks.
That includes open space.
Well, let's say
Correct.
of open space, parks under control, not including trails, because I understand you don't include trails. Because back in 2012, we had 490 acres of park and maintenance that we had gone from 44. So what's the number now?
I'm sorry, Anjali is fresh off land acquisition strategy, so she's got some great numbers.
Creek wasn't part of it, Big Rock
662.
wasn't part of it.
So 662 acres.
662.
That's parks and preserves.
So the first reality we have is in our 10 years, in the first 12 years, we had grown 10 times from 44 acres to 490 acres. And now it's 692 is the number that we have in the last 5 years that we've increased our parks that we have under, and not including trails again, because you don't include the trails in that number. So it's been a significant increase that's
Well, don't forget, we acquired Klahani.
Sorry?
We acquired Klahani with their park.
We acquired Klahani with one park, which is another point I'll get to, because I think that skews our data when we're looking, because back in 2012, we had passed all the different indicators that had been used, and we were told that the only one that we could look at under the half-mile radius was the northeast quadrant. And there was a fight at that point because most cities use 1 mile radiuses for parks. And so there was a discussion, do we even need that? And that later had some advantages coming in from Mystic Lake. So but that's as a backdrop into it. Klahani, I think, is another issue since you raised it, Councilmember Huckabee. We're now looking at it by the number of people, looking at the density. So we have acquired Klahani and their 10, 11,000 residents. However, Klahani can't take more parks because they've got very little land. So we're skewing to the non-Klahani, but using their number. So I think that there's a fallacy in that number and how we're doing that, because you can't serve those citizens because they don't have land to put it there. You'd be putting parks in other parcels. In the last pro plan in 2012, I had asked that we look at the willingness of people to pay for parks. When you did your survey, it reminded me a little bit similar to how we did the first community aquatic center, where you're saying, do you want? And there was no cost associated with it, which even at that point turned out to be a big fallacy, because we ended up with an $80 million facility that was unfeasible and had to redo the exercise. Currently, as we're doing this exercise, unfortunately, we're doing this exercise under business as usual, when we know that we have a fiscal structural imbalance that's not going to be addressed until the next council next year, and we have deficits that we have to address into it. So that's one issue that I have with how we're looking at this, because unfortunately, and that's our fault, the council's fault for not addressing it and being able to give some guidance and input into that, because those can't be put in there. We don't know what those citizens are willing to pay to utilize this if we use the Department of Interior willingness to pay type of model to understand that. Additionally, I have an issue with the pro plan, because while you did identify areas that are underserved, we've touched upon it, especially Councilmember Jaron, we're going to have a dramatic shortage of fields. We know that there is a shortage of fields today. We've had the leagues coming in here wanting more natural fields. They wanted more fields at AstroTurf. And we've already been told that we're going to be losing community fields usage time. So we know that there is a big demand coming up, pent-up demand that's going to have to be met. And that's not even going to be enough with an indoor field coming. How am I going to address that? So we need to look at what are the wants of people and what are the needs that they're not aware of that are going to be happening. And we're going to hear a lot of screaming from those clubs, because they feel they're underserved right now in Sammamish and fields, as they've come and told us. And that's before the schools have said that they're going to take more time from us from our community field. So I think we need to look at what are the needs of the community, taking into account what's going forward, before the wants that are not being in a methodology that starts to look at the cost of those wants and associated with the fiscal reality that we're going to be facing. And if you take into account what you heard from the King County assessor of $1,400 extra per tax just for McCleary, not including the ST3 taxes and the others, it's going to be a very different tone of conversations when we start to ask for more money from our citizens going forward. I also am a little bit concerned about the issue of the request for more park staff, albeit we have to be looking at how do we service this and the mode of service, as Councilmember Odell had, But after public safety, parks is our largest item of the general budget funds, our general funds as well. And so unfortunately, until next year, when that council finally looks at the issue, we're not going to be able to see how that starts to play out and what model has to be adjusted to do it. I'm also interested to see what is our maintenance and operation costs for the parks that we currently have in maintenance and how it's going to be sustainable. Lee Felling, must have been 7 years ago, was really pounding on that issue when he was a councilman mayor, saying that's the issue that really can endanger us. And I'd like to see what is for our 692, the maintenance and operation costs. When we were looking at the Big Rock Park and putting in that capital investment of that plan, the master plan, which was, I believe, $4.2 million, the maintenance and operation cost annual expected, if we put that all in, was $400,000 a year alone for that park. So I think we need to have that breakout to see and how much can we swallow and how do we right size to different levels of services to different parks that we are looking at and servicing in our city, because otherwise our money is going to be going into parks that may not be as well served. And I mean, we've talked previously about the usage of those and trying to use those as an indicator to help us look at it. Let me see, what else do I have here? Yeah, especially given that Lyman mentioned that we haven't had any new taxes, as we haven't, and when we start to address those issues coming forward at fiscal, it's got to be paid for some way, and I don't think our citizens understand that. I don't think they even understand the McCleary impact that's really going to be hitting them, how hard. So those are all issues that we have to look at. What is the reality today, not the old model? What are the needs over wants? And how are we going to look at that? And to that, I'm sorry that this council will not be able to address some of those issues until next council sits down and looks at the budgets and how we're going to make those adjustments. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Hornish.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, for sure. I've got just two questions or points. Which of the various methods, community survey, virtual hall, the community, or the open houses, which one would you say should be weighted more?
I would say the community survey, since it's a statistically valid survey and it hit a good cross-representation.
I knew you would say that, so I'm going to make my second point.
Okay.
And Councilmember Malchow hit upon it earlier, because I made the exact same note when I was reading through this. I will caution everybody doing the pro plan, do not come with preconceived conclusions, please. The fact that you say 40% think there are not enough parks when 50% think that there are, that sounds like you're trying to sell us something that we may not want to buy. And I'm really frustrated at that, because it sounds like it sounds as if you've never met a pro plan that doesn't want to buy more parks. I don't think that's fair to spin it to say 40% think we need more parks when 50% think we don't. If that's the best value, and all these other methods may have preconceived ideas that they're trying to get across. So that's why I asked that question to begin with. Now, having said that, I really like the level of service analogies that you've gone through and everything. But there was some discussion here that I thought was very, very good, in that I will ask you specifically, can you include all the stuff that we know that we're going to be getting by donations? We talked about the 20 acres. We know we have the YMCA property. And I would also ask, let's include Soaring Eagle and Duthie Hill for our citizens. And let's see where we're at on a level of service currently compared to where we want to try to get. And I would also caution you that, and this goes to somewhat of a fiscal restraint discussion, I had this discussion on compensation. When everybody tries to get to the average, what happens to the average? It goes up, because nobody's going to come down. So I question whether or not we need to get to the average, but I think we need to be looking at it. I think I guess just kind of listening to the presentation, the programs and the stakeholder inputs and the fields, I think is where we really need to put our priorities at this point, given the fiscal uncertainties that we have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. It looks like I have one more question from Tom Odell.
Thank you. When you bring all this stuff back, I'd also like to see some sort of comparison with our peer cities, such as...
Speak up. Speak up.
I'd like to see some sort of comparison with our peer cities.
Thank you.
Redmond, Mercer Island, Bellevue, Issaquah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Steve, looks like we have no more questions. I want to thank you very much for your thorough presentation. Angie, did we give you enough time tonight? Did we cover this for you?
Yes.
Very good. I am 14 minutes ahead of schedule. I think those are double minutes that I get.
I think you get credit tonight for those 14 minutes.
Thank you. Again, staff, thank you very much for your presentation, and that
Thank you,
concludes
Andrew.
tonight then.
It was more succinct.